Hello everyone, if you're new to my channel, consider liking and subscribing. It will make me feel wonderful if you do that. Thanks. By the way, I also have another Naruto and Luffy fanfiction channel. If you are interested, link is in the description.
Skip by Anjelle. During a battle 10 years from now, Pirate King Luffy is caught in an explosion. Now he finds himself on the Whitebeard's ship, the Moby Dick, and all of the pirates who died at Marineford, such as Ace and Whitebeard, are alive. How did he end up over 10 years in the past, and what will he do next? I don't own anything. Adios.
He appeared from the smoke and rubble of the open battlefield, the only one unscathed. The man stood tall, arms crossed in a bout of confidence as he watched the hundreds of others fight around him. His raven strands hid the better half of his face in shadows, leaving his grinning mouth as his most distinguishable feature. A tall man stood across the battlefield. He clenched his teeth and gripped his bloodied arm, clearly in worse shape than his foe. His blue eyes never left his target, and the proud man before him made his move. That bastard hadn't broken a sweat. Captain's jacket hung over his shoulders. The man continued his smile and stretched. All of the destruction he had caused up to that moment was a warm-up for him, a test run. But he wouldn't lose. There was still one more thing he could do. Ready to give up? The blue-eyed man asked as his battered body began to fail him. Just a little longer. At this his opponent laughed. The amusement in his voice made his stomach churn. He was a cocky bastard, no doubt. Got a secret move? As a matter of fact, the raven-haired man's interest grew. He stopped where he was and watched with a wicked grin. His broken opponent took the last of his energy to stand tall. He stretched out both of his hands. The right began to emit a bright light while the left was enveloped in blackness. You haven't asked what my devil fruit is. Oh, I'm afraid you've reached the end, Pirate King. His hands collided in his center and the darkness and light collided and spiraled around his figure. Afraid that's not enough, you're delusional. He aimed the two energies at the Pirate King and released them. They surrounded the man whose smile never faded. Both sides ceased their fighting to marvel at the sight in bewilderment. The black-haired man's allies stared in horror while his enemies laughed in victory. This was it. As he watched the figure clad in red vanish, he heard one final sound. She. Ace woke from his narcoleptic fit, greeted by the amused faces of his crew.
He yawned and stretched, and yet their eyes never left them. The man eyed them as a warning. He wasn't in the best of moods as of late. It felt great when he took Whitebeard's mark, but now he was faced with the important decision of whether he would take the title of 2nd Division Commander. It was an honor to be considered, but it wasn't something he was prepared to take on. The crew still didn't know about his secret. Whitebeard still didn't know.
As he continued his internal battle, Thatch decided that it was time to bother the kid. He swung his arm over Fire Fist's shoulders and was met with a surprised jump. He let out a hearty laugh. Made your decision yet, kid? I don't know. Just take it, we've been without a 2nd Division Commander for. Before the man could finish, their ship was met with a massive explosion. Men scurried across the deck in a feeble attempt to survey the situation. It was chaos all around, and in the middle was a thick, black smoke. Ace's eyes almost jumped from their sockets. Who would dare attack Whitebeard's ship? Nothing like that had happened before. Whitebeard was untouchable. The strongest man in the world. No one messed with him or his crew. He slowly rose to his feet and took a look around. No one knew what to do. They assumed there was a fire and prepared buckets of water to throw into the smoke. Before they had the chance to act, coughing came from the smoke. A person? Whitebeard himself was not fazed and remained calm as his sons scurried about in panicked confusion. He'd been through a lot during his reign, and this was far from the least expected. Every once in a while some fool would attack him thinking he was strong and would later be pummeled by his crew. What concerned him was that there was nothing around them. No islands, ships, or even seekings. That was unnatural. Damn Yonko! Shouted a voice from the point of impact. The smoke finally lifted to reveal a man dressed in a red captain's jacket and black shorts that went just below his knees. His hair was dark ebony, as were his eyes, and a curved scar adorned his left cheek. He didn't seem strong or special in any way. In fact, he was rather scrawny. The man straightened himself out and cussed under his breath as he dusted himself off. It was interesting to them that he was free of injury despite the impact he made. Then he paused and stared at the crowd on deck. He blinked twice with large, blank eyes before he casually waved their way. Then he took a look at the broken wood at his feet and slowly grasped the situation. Oh, he said simply, realization washing over him, sorry about that. Then he began circling around. It seemed he was searching for something and, after seeing no sight of it, simply grew in confusion. He noticed that he was out at sea and not in a battlefield. He tilted his head, folded his arms and let out an exasperated sigh. Must have flown pretty far.
Who are you? Jozu asked the question everyone wanted to ask, and the man's first reply was a burst of laughter.
You don't know? The crew shook their heads. Well, it's not important. Then his eyes fell on Whitebeard and he simply marveled at his presence. The strongest man in the world was before him, but that wasn't what elicited his reaction. No, this wasn't right. Whitebeard should not be there. Now he was starting to understand what the Yonko had done, or at least intended. This wasn't where he belonged. "Oi, giant Asen," he called out, the crew baffled at his lack of manners. "You're alive?" What had the stranger just asked? Was Whitebeard alive? To them it sounded like a threat, but the old man interpreted it differently. This man was no enemy. He wasn't hostile or angry or anything more than simply interested in the Yonko. His question was sincere. Many of the commanders blocked the path between the two protectively. They weren't about to allow that stranger attack him, even if he was no match for him. Whitebeard was getting old. He didn't need to use his strength unnecessarily. They were surprised when their captain laughed. He wasn't weary of the boy in the slightest. Seeing the Yonko's reaction, the stranger relaxed and sat down cross-legged with a smile. The two laughed together and then fell into silence. Whitebeard finished his study of the man and leaned back in his large chair. He rested his head on his fist and gave the man an odd look. "Where are we, exactly?" "The first half of the New World." The man whistled and laughed at this. "I was flown pretty far, she. Ace's eyes narrowed. The stranger's laugh was oddly familiar. He had never seen him, though. Scanning his features once more, he noted that the man was probably in his late 20s. He didn't seem strong or intelligent. If it wasn't for his overdone arrival, no member of the crew would bother to look his way. "Who are you, boy?" bellowed the old man, catching the attention of the stranger. He decided that he would comply. He was still relaxing on the charred and broken wood of the deck. His grin stretched further so that his mouth reached ear to ear. Then he stood. "Pirate King, Monkey D. Luffy." Needless to say, everyone was shocked. This man claimed to be the Pirate King, a title given only to the one who obtained everything the world had to offer. They would laugh, but it was so ridiculous that they went quiet. Ace was shocked for a different reason. This man had claimed to be his brother. He had to be mad. Something was not right about him. Pirate King or not, no one takes the name of his brother. "Oi!" Ace shouted. The man turned to him. Once he saw his face, his already large eyes doubled. Ace stepped forward in a rather intimidating stance. He wasn't going to let him lie about that. Quit with the lies. "Ace," Luffy's eyes remained blank. He didn't know how to react to that and just kept watching, trying to understand how something like that was possible. Ace was dead. He died in his arms 10 years ago. Why was he there? Why was Whitebeard there? He continued to stare in a daze until his broth of him. "Why don't you tell us the truth? You know each other or something?" Marco interjected, curiosity reaching its peak. He saw the expression on the stranger's face and knew that something wasn't right. He had to know what that something was. "Not at all," Ace shot back without hesitation. "Yeah, we do," the man contradicted. He collapsed to the ground to try to calm down. There was too much going on in his head. He was starting to understand what the Yonko had done. Finally it was all making sense. But the situation was not in his favor. "He's my brother. This is bad." Everyone's eyes focused on the two boys, mouths agape and eyes enlarged. They hadn't expected that. They didn't even know that Ace had any family, or that said family told such exaggerated lies. Pirate King? No, the only Pirate King was Gold Roger and he'd long since been executed. "You don't believe him, do you?" Ace asked, irritation growing with each avoided glance. They did, and that just made him want to hit them all. That stranger couldn't be his brother. Luffy was still only a 16-year-old boy and, although there were similarities, he didn't have a straw hat. He carried himself differently as well. There was something off about him, something he couldn't trust. This man, whoever he really was no ordinary man. "I don't blame you, Ace." The stranger was scratching his head and pouting in a childish manner. He sighed, as if disappointed, and looked into Fire Fist's eyes. He had managed to calm himself down despite his desire to run up and hug the bastard. This was no time for him to freak out. He needed to think, as hard as that was. This shouldn't have happened. "What, Yoi?" Marco asked. He didn't think the stranger was an enemy because Whitebeard didn't, and he trusted his captain's judgment. This man also didn't seem to be lying. His expression was sincere. That was something he'd learned to notice over the years. It was a rare sight on a pirate, though. "This isn't my timeline. Bastard Yonko sent me into the past." Luffy ignored their reactions and cursed himself internally. He should have figured his opponent had a power like that, but he didn't know because all of his opponents would disappear. That explained why. Of course, he underestimated him without even seeing the power he used. That was a stupid mistake. He'd done it before, but this was the first time his confidence had landed him with such dire consequences. It was great to see his brother again, but he knew Ace well. Ace was stubborn, and once he believed something it was hard to change his mind. There was little hope for them to spend time together because of that. Also, he had to get back. His crew and allies were in danger. They were all badly injured. This was no time to play around in the past. "Is that so?" Marco asked, accepting it immediately. Whoever he was being honest. There was something in his eyes that told him so. The old man seemed to agree. So, Oyaji, what should we do about this, Yoi? He turned to the captain and awaited his orders, but could see from the corner of his eye that Ace was not pleased. You're just going to accept it? Just like that? Doesn't seem like the type to lie, Yoi, but he can stay if he chooses, Whitebeard declared, leaving no room for questioning. Ace clenched his fist and dropped the subject. If the old man said it was okay, he had no reason to object. The captain made all of the decisions. Luffy looked at Whitebeard with a large grin. It seemed that someone was on his side. He stood and walked nearer to the giant man. So you believe me?
I've heard of that devil fruit before. It seems a man from West Blue recently ate it.
Then I'll accept your offer, Luffy stated. He beamed up at the old Yonko who smiled slightly back. Though few dared to approach him, all of the crew members were curious about that self-titled Pirate King. He sat at the far end of the dining hall, stuffing his face with food and booze. The chef had trouble keeping up with both him and Ace, who was seated at a table near him. All of them marveled at his appetite and the fact that he was even worse than their own infamous black hole. So many questions ran through their heads as they watched. This was the man who claimed to be the strongest in the sea. He was said to have attained all the world had to offer, and yet here he was eating all of their food and drinking their rum. Have your fill yet, Yoi? Marco took his seat next to the man as he devoured another chunk of meat. He was drawn to the man for one reason or another. The rest of the crew quieted themselves so that they could hear their conversation. Marco was the only one willing to approach him, but everyone wanted to know more. This was their chance. Nope. Didn't think so. He watched as the man with the scar shoveled more into his mouth. It was disgusting but impressive. Luffy realized who he was talking to. He remembered Marco from his time. They had become quite close allies over the years. And drinking buddies. This Marco didn't know him, though. They first met when they fought alongside at Marineford, which clearly hadn't happened yet. Thanks Marco, Luffy mumbled between bites. He had always missed the chance to tell him that before, so he would say it now. For what? Luffy kept his voice down. He really didn't need everyone hearing them. Marco, he knew, could handle the information. The rest of the Whitebeard pirates' reactions were questionable. He knew the commanders and some others by name but still didn't know them well enough to say anything. For what you're going to do for Ace. I take it you know me, Yoi? The man nodded with a smile. It was probably best that he didn't say any more for the time. Ace approached them. His curiosity had overwhelmed his anger and irritation, and, with no one better to take out his frustration on, why not bother the liar? He noticed that the man was watching him approach. The Luffy he knew wouldn't be able to focus on anything other than food. Another difference. He sat down across from them. If you're Luffy, then where's your hat? He had him now. Luffy always kept that with him. With Nami. Who? My Nakama. I didn't want to get blood on it, so I let her hold on to it. You don't let anyone touch that hat. I do now. Luffy was glad that Ace had said, you, instead of, he. It showed that maybe there was some hope. He didn't want to talk to Ace before he left. It had been 10 years since he last heard that voice. Being in the past made it seem like every night he spent thinking of his brother were just dreams. It was eerie, and yet he couldn't be more excited. He didn't want to show that, though. He knew that if he freaked out over it, they would start asking questions. Was he supposed to tell them about Ace's death or not? He would have to think it over before making that decision. Night had fallen and most of the crew headed to bed. It had been a long day. Aside from Marco, who was on watch, Luffy was the only one on deck. He claimed the Moby's figurehead as his special seat and watched the water from there. He had thought about his situation all day and finally came to a decision, but he would have to wait in order to take action. No one trusted him yet. He hoped he didn't stay long enough for them to trust him to begin with. Every second he wasted, there was another second wasted in his time. Probably. Were they doing all right? His Nakama needed him. This was no time to relax in the past. Alas, there was nothing he could do. His only hope was to find the bastard Yonko in this time and beat him up until he brought him back to where he belonged. Marco heard the man grumble all the way from his spot in the crow's nest. Didn't seem to be enjoying himself. He turned around and looked into the galley windows. The lights were on and it seemed a few of his mates were enjoying themselves inside. Well, it didn't bother him. He didn't mind watch duty because it was one of the only chances he had for quiet relaxation. Of course, he still had to keep an eye out for any ships. The galley door opened and Ace stepped outside. Marco raised an eyebrow. It looked like the most stubborn of them all really did hold an interest in the so-called Pirate King. Marco might get some entertainment. Ace approached Luffy quietly. Why was he even out there? He didn't believe the man, so why was he compelled to be near him? Why did he want to ask him more? It was so frustrating. Still, he was there, so he might as well try to converse. I'm hungry, Luffy complained, mostly to himself. Ace resisted the urge to hit the older man. They just had dinner an hour ago. What kind of stomach did he have? What irritated him most was that he sounded just like Luffy when he said that. Got a death wish? The cook's gonna kill y'all at this rate? She. He took it as a joke, but Ace was actually being serious. If they kept him on the ship too long he'd eat all of their resources. A rather scary thought. Sanji's like that too. I'm used to it. Sanji, the chef on my ship. Ah, it went silent for a while. Ace wasn't really sure what he wanted to say to him. He just knew that there was something on his mind. And Luffy, being Luffy, was too distracted by his stomach to fully focus on the situation. Besides, what could he say? He wanted Ace to believe him. Oh. Remember Sabo? He asked, hoping this would prove he really was his brother. He stared out at the sea in an attempt to avoid seeing Fire Fist's shock. It had been a long time since Sabo's death and even more time had passed for the Pirate King. He never forgot. Taking his silence as a cue, he thought of what to say next. Wonder what he'd say if he were here. Probably just laugh. Luffy blinked at this. Ace had responded, which was shocking enough, but he had replied instead of interrogating him. Slowly he turned to face the man behind him. Fire Fist was calm and watched the sea. His mouth curled up slightly into a sad-looking smile.
Yeah, Ace woke in the late morn. He'd stayed up late watching the ocean and even waking as late as he did left him tired and lacking energy. After attempting to wake himself up further, he just felt grumpy. He knew he couldn't stay in bed any later, but he wasn't happy about it. So he groggily made his way to the deck. He opened the door and was met with a blinding sun that just aggravated him further. As his eyes adjusted, he surveyed the area. It was almost normal. Almost, but not quite.
Whitebeard was in his chair and Luffy sat right in front of him. Both were sharing sake, much to the displeasure of the captain's nurses. Even though the sun was still high in the sky. They got along for some reason or another and seemed to enjoy each other's company. Ace didn't remember Luffy being such a heavy drinker. What had changed over the years? Oi, Ace. He sighed when he heard his little big brother call him over. Adult Luffy was just as hopeless as the regular one, only in different ways. If they kept that up all day there was no doubt they'd both be drunk off their asses by the end of it. Instead of going over to him, he decided to head to where Thatch and Marco were standing. He was surprised to see Marco awake already despite staying up all night. What's up with them? Don't know. Seems like they were the first two up, yoi. Ace didn't like the sound of that. He knew Whitebeard to be quite a drinker, but the old guy normally waited until mid-afternoon to start. That pegged him as odd. It was even stranger knowing that the two were alone together in the morning. There was no doubt that something had happened, but he couldn't flat out ask and would have to find some other way to figure it out. That didn't matter at the moment. For now he would simply observe. He had to admit that the man could be his brother. After all, it was hard to deny it after he'd mentioned Sabo. And though he looked different, there were definitely too many similarities. But Luffy, Pirate King? Well, he was one to follow through with his goals, so it wasn't impossible. Ace. Luffy called him over again. He scowled. The man was persistent. He walked towards his brother and chosen captain, trying to hold back a laugh at the goofy expression on Luffy's face. He was smiling weirdly and there was a tint of red on his face. An effect of the alcohol, no doubt. When he got nearer to them he turned to Whitebeard. There was a definite concern in his expression, but he kept quiet. Instead he hit his brother hard across the top of his head. Don't get drunk so early in the morning. I'm not, the Pirate King whined as he rubbed the sore spot on his skull. He was telling the truth, he wasn't drunk yet. Ignoring him, Ace turned his attention to his captain. There was something off about him. No doubt Luffy had said something. What is it, Oyaji? Nothing for you to worry about, my son. As the two continued talking and Luffy rubbed his head, someone exited the galley. The king's eyes widened at the sight. He recognized the man's dark skin, black hair and missing teeth. There was no doubt about it. Before he had a chance to think his body moved in his own. At blinding speeds he charged at Teach and pinned him against the galley wall. Gear second. His body tinted red and let off steam as he readied his fist. This man has to die. Luffy's blood was boiling. Seeing Teach's face made him fly into a rage. He was out for blood. Without turning, he heard every pirate on deck cock their weapons. If he continued with his punch they would shoot. That wouldn't be a big deal normally, but the commanders could use haki. After the initial attack, the rest would follow suit with swords and devil fruit abilities all going at him once. All of the possible outcomes played in his head in that instant. He didn't want to become one of his enemies but he couldn't let that monster go. What was more important to him? The hell do you think you're doing? Ace asked, his voice hoarse and riddled with anger. He was pissed. Just when he was about to accept that man's stories and claims he pulled something like that. No one attacked his crew. No one. Sorry, Luffy started while attempting to stop his angry trembling, but this filth has to die. His grip tightened around Teach's neck and the man began clawing at his throat as his supply of air was cut off. Luffy still held back his fist, but he wouldn't for much longer. Keeping Ace's crew safe was more important than earning their trust. It didn't matter what was changed in his time because of that. He didn't need the title of Pirate King or the strength he had. He would gladly give it up to save their lives. It wasn't like he could blame them for their actions, either. He was attacking their nakama. He was betraying them even though Whitebeard had allowed him to stay aboard. This was the ultimate crime to that crew who valued the lives of each of their members above all else. Ace stared, waiting for any movements. Flames were rising from his fists and his shoulders as his anger flared. This man wasn't Luffy. He felt like a fool for believing him. His brother would never react that way to anything. He wouldn't try to kill someone for no good reason. Bastard, let him go. Luffy flinched at that. The last thing he wanted was for his brother to hate him. It was a tough decision, whether to save his brother or not. But he'd rather be hated and have Ace alive than be trusted and have his brother killed. Still. Lower your fist, Whitebeard demanded, his tone still calm and unwavering. Luffy's eyes met his but his stance remained unchanged. His words seemed to just fuel his anger even more. You wanna die, Asen? He asked, his voice sharp and deadly as he fought back his urge to kill the man he'd pinned to the wall. The commanders took this as a threat and aimed their weapons directly at his head. They knew now how strong the man was. His will was making them dizzy and he wasn't even using haki. Pirate King or not, he was far stronger than most of the commanders. They never expected him to act that way, either. He was a very laid-back guy who was content with sitting around and eating, as far as they could tell. He has done nothing wrong, they heard their captain reply. He's a traitor and a dirty coward. Not yet. Luffy tensed at that. He was right. He hadn't done anything at that point, but it was only a matter of time before he started the War of the Best. It was only a matter of time before they all died. Still, he had to admire the Yonko's trust in his crew. It was naive but true.
Ace watched as the man's skin returned to normal and he loosened his grip on Teach's neck.
When the pirate regained his footing, they all thought it was over. Then Luffy sent a punch flying into the man's gut. Teach was sent through the wall and landed all the way on the other side of the ship. Then he turned sharply and stomped over to the figurehead to sulk. A few pirates from the 2nd Division ran to aid their comrade while the commanders prepared their assault. The fight was stopped, however, when they heard the booming voice of their father and captain. Leave him. They reluctantly lowered their weapons but didn't look away from the self-proclaimed Pirate King. He wasn't trustworthy. He just tried to kill one of their crewmates. Thatch walked over to Ace, who was still watching the man with fury in his eyes. He decided to try talking to his friend before they had another fight on their hands. Your brother has a worse temper than you do, he teased. His hands were behind his head and he was smiling his usual smile in an attempt to relax Fire Fist. Clearly it wasn't working. He's not my brother. With that, Ace stormed away and went below deck back to his room. He couldn't stand being near the bastard. Thatch sighed at this. He was always hard to deal with. No doubt he'd be in a bad mood for a while after an incident like that. Thatch headed over to the figurehead. Marco was already there sitting next to Luffy in silence. If the 1st Division commander trusted him, then so would Thatch. He always had good instincts about that sort of stuff. Hadn't been wrong yet. He leant against the rail and listened to their conversation. So, Yoi? Marco asked, waiting for the man to speak to him. Instead his reply was a sigh followed by him dropping his head into his hands. Clearly he was not in the mood to be interrogated. Ace is going to hate me again, isn't he? Probably, Yoi. Luffy's shoulders sunk and he heaved another sigh. Marco was surprised at how whiny a man his age could be. He had a strange personality. He could be serious and downright scary in an instant but otherwise acted like a child. Still, he couldn't bring himself to hate him. The determination he saw in his eyes only minutes ago was something he admired. He always took a liking to people who showed raw talent and potential. It didn't matter if he knew them or not. Despite what the man did, he still trusted him. After all, he didn't go through with it. What he wanted to know was why. Why teach him? He's going to do something, right? What is it, Yoi? He knew there was something off about the man since he first joined his crew. He never fully trusted him and now he would get a chance to find out why. Luffy tilted his head and stared blankly into the eyes of the 1st Division commander. He didn't expect anyone to ask that. After thinking about it for a moment he realized that he really didn't care if Marco knew or not. He was someone he could trust regardless of what time they were in. He'll betray you and start a war. It took a lot to kill him in my time, so seeing him pissed me off. Clearly, so you're a murderer then, Yoi? You helped. A bemused smirk crossed Marco's face. He hadn't expected it but found it interesting all the same. It was strange to hear about what he would do in the future. There were more important things to worry about though. What exactly does he do, Yoi? One of the commanders is named Thatch, right? Marco nodded and Thatch's ears perked up. Luffy wasn't in the mood to worry about what the information would change. Whatever happened, happened. It didn't matter. He's going to kill him. They felt themselves freeze at those words. Both broke into a cold sweat, imagining what the man had said. And then, Ace will go after him. Then he's going to be executed. Whitebeard will start a war with the Marine but he'll lose. The two tried to compose themselves but the information was startling. It was unsettling. It couldn't be right. They couldn't take the chance that it was wrong. When will that happen? When I'm 17. Ace spent the majority of the day scowling at his so-called friends. Marco and Thatch had been hanging around that lying jerk ever since the incident 3 days before, and it more than irritated him. He felt betrayed. The self-proclaimed Pirate King attacked a member of his division, and then the two people he was closest to were suddenly constantly around him. Naturally he didn't approach. How could he? Every time he saw that bug-eyed asshole he wanted to set him on fire. He tried. Even after a momentary smell of burnt rubber, the flames were dissipated by a strong wave of hockey he'd never seen before. Effortlessly, and so he kept his distance. Luffy looked over his shoulder at his brother and pouted after receiving a death glare. They had not spoken since his little outburst days ago, and it was really starting to bother him. He didn't regret attacking the traitorous bastard, though, as he rightfully deserved it. Still, he was upset with himself for being unable to tell Ace why he did it.
How do you tell the person you grew up with, who practically raised you as his younger sibling, that he's going to die as a result of his comrades' betrayals? All throughout those days Luffy had been wondering if he could change that fact. However, he recalled his scholar, Robin, telling him about the laws of time. Regardless of how the journey was made, the result would likely be the same. It was out of their control. Time wasn't so easily molded.
He found his mind wandering back to that day, a time that was 10 years ago for him and yet had not occurred in his surroundings. He remembered the limp body of his brother in his arms. He remembered his blood-soaked hands and those final words that his only remaining sibling uttered lowly with the last of his strength. He remembered the tears. "Thank you for loving me." When he first arrived in that time and saw Ace, he thought he was in a dream. Or a nightmare. The thought of reliving that day was too much for him. After a few hours, though, he saw the situation as an opportunity. He could speak to his brother for just a little longer and put off the emptiness of his loss. There was so much to tell him, so much they could say to each other, and yet he was stuck sitting on the figurehead in silence. He made a mistake. One that cost him any sort of relationship with the one he lost. Ace hated him. A tap on the shoulder brought him out of his thoughts and back to the sun-coated reality of the ship.
He spun his head around and gave a small smile to his old yet new friend. Marco took a seat next to him, as per their new custom, and hung his legs over Moby's edge. The salty sea sprayed over them as they watched ahead. He'd grown quite fond of the blonde's presence since his stay there began. He felt the same about Thatch, though he wasn't impressed when he learned of the man's eavesdropping on that oh-so-important conversation he and the 1st Division commander had.
Still sulking, "Yoi, I'm being hated by my dead brother," he stated, eyes half-lidded as he watched the sky turn from blue to gold. "Glad to see you're so optimistic," Thatch teased, arriving on the other side of Luffy in a manner similar to the first commander. "Shut up," Luffy commanded in retort, his voice more annoyed than angry. Though the situation looked grim, he was happy having people on the ship who didn't want to slice him into ribbons. Being away from his crew just made him realize how easily he became lonely. He'd accepted that there was nothing he could do about the situation until he found that Yonko bastard who sent him there in the first place, but it didn't make the unease he felt any better. "Why not explain it to him?" Thatch inquired, trying to brighten the Pirate King's mood. His pessimism didn't suit him, and it was starting to make both commanders more than just a little worried. "We're talking about Ace." His fury knows no bounds. To prove his point he gestured to the man in question, receiving a snarling glare in return. "See?" He had a point. When someone tried to harm any of his crewmates, Ace was at their throats in a heartbeat. He cared for them so much that he was willing to forsake his loyalty to his captain in order to seek out revenge. It was amazing that he had only attempted to murder Luffy once after that outburst 3 days ago. True as that may be, Thatch's voice trailed off as he tried to think up a way to cheer up the gloomy fellow. Marco beat him to it. "You'll just end up regretting it if you don't try, Yoi," Marco stated, watching as a flash of realization washed over the Pirate King's face. Apparently he'd struck a chord with the young man. Well, anything to get the childish adult out of his slump. "Yeah," he began, giving them both one of his trademark grins as his confidence returned. "You're right. If this was the only chance he would ever have to see his brother again, then he would take it." How could he not? He hadn't seen his brother's face in the last decade, not even his wanted posters, and he wanted to be sure to burn his features into his memory before it was ripped away from him again. Regardless of how much you care for someone, you eventually begin to forget them. You forget their face, their touch, who they were. Time takes everything from you but the bitter regret and sorrow the loss brought forth. Hopefully he could see his smile, just once. With that newest revelation fueling his energy, he hopped away from the two smiling commanders and headed over to the man who wanted to fry his innards into charcoal. Stopping in front of Ace, he was greeted with an angry snarl and a look that told him if he were to get any closer his head would be torn off, or worse. "Ace," he beamed, ignoring the signals his brother was giving him to make him leave. Fire Fist crossed his arms and narrowed his eyes into an even sharper glare, trying to intimidate the man who claimed to be the strongest in the world. "Don't say my name so easily, bastard," he barked, flames rising from his shoulders as he did his best to control his anger. Oyaji didn't want him fighting the man, but the thought was far too tempting for him to ignore. He wouldn't be able to contain himself for long. So he watched the man, waiting for him to make the wrong move. His eyes widened when he saw Luffy enter into a low bow and hold himself there. "Sorry," the older man started, still staying in that pleading, desperate position. It was ironic to see the self-proclaimed king lower himself like that. "I should have said something before acting. I was wrong." Ace was taken aback by the scarred man's words and fought to find his composure as he tried to make sense of what he was saying. He was apologizing for the other night, for the attack on Teach. "Forgive me?" Luffy asked, raising his head to show his toothy grin that spread wide across his face. Ace's features softened for a moment, still showing concern. Something about that man made it impossible for him to stay as furious as he was. The flames on his shoulders dissipated and now he was giving the older man a look of serious contemplation, sharply contrasting the unabashed anger his face held before. "Why did you do it?" His voice was calm and laced with a negative emotion Luffy recognized as hurt. It was only then that the Pirate King realized how much his actions that day had affected his brother, and why. Ace really believed Luffy's claims before then. He had thought that, just maybe, he could be telling the truth. He was the Pirate King. He was Luffy. They were brothers. But then his attack on Blackbeard had left him feeling betrayed. Just as he was starting to accept the raven-haired man's stories, he attacked one of his crewmates, a member of his division, no less. Now Luffy knew just why Ace was so upset. "I can't say. Why?" This time Fire Fist's tone was a lot sharper and more frantic. Luffy could see a small spark of pleading in his now younger brother's eyes. He was searching for a reason to believe in him before his anger returned. He wanted Luffy to give him an excuse to explain away his previous actions so forgive him. But he could give him the answers he wanted. The older man knew just how Ace would react to the information and couldn't risk putting him in danger. He didn't want to lose him again. "He doesn't want you to do anything stupid, Yoi," Marco stated as he and Thatch headed over to the brothers, noting it was time for them to intervene. From their observations over the past few days, they realized that the guy was bad at explaining himself and would need their help to convey the details of such a sensitive topic, lest he cause more damage. "I won't, you do." As Ace's eyes widened at those simple two words, Marco prepared himself to say the one thing he knew his friend needed to hear: "You died." Ace felt his body go numb. The words his crewmate spoke repeated over and over in his mind as his skin drained of color into a ghostly white. In an effort to prove those words wrong, he glanced over at Luffy, waiting for him to disprove the accusation. His eyes enlarged as his vision rested on the man, still bent over in a partial bow, whose face had contorted into a look of agony. That expression reminded him of his and his little brother's reactions to Sabo's death. Though this man was not crying as the young boy had, it was plain to see that those words physically hurt to hear. He could see the apologetic look on the older man's face. It didn't suit him, and resigned himself to the fact. So he would die. He broke his promise. "Oh," Ace sighed, watching the silhouette of his brother sitting on the figurehead. They hadn't spoken a word since sunset when Marco made the big reveal of his death. He wasn't really sure how he was supposed to react to that. Going by how old Luffy looked, he would last a decade at most. Something told him he wasn't so lucky, though, and he couldn't help but wonder when and how it happened. Marco mentioned that it was a result of his recklessness, meaning that it wasn't a natural death. It could be prevented, possible. Or was that wrong? Could you change the past? He found himself unconsciously stepping nearer to the front of the ship, standing directly behind Luffy, wanting to know more. After their earlier conversation, he'd resigned himself to believe the Pirate King's words. He believed it before, too, if only a little. Now he was certain. He had to believe. The expression on his face when Marco said that Ace would die was all too real. "Hey," he found himself calling out, though he wasn't sure what to say. He was nervous. Luffy turned to him, smiling and inviting him to sit on the figurehead. He accepted the invitation and took his place next to his brother, pondering how to word his questions. He didn't want to upset the man, but he also didn't want to be left in the dark. I was heading to your grave before all of this," Luffy stated, noticing the nervousness in Ace's voice. He didn't bother to look at him, but he could see out of the corner of his eye that Fire Fist turned his way, rather awkward. "It was weird to hear about your own grave, unnerving." Still, Luffy was explaining it to him and so he wouldn't interrupt. "We were ambushed on the way there. A Yonko attacked my crew and managed to get us onto an island for battle when our long-range weapons failed us." "A Yonko? You fight them?" Ace asked, more intrigued than he was about the grave. It was hard to hear about that bratty boy he remembered taking on one of the strongest powers on the sea. "Not usually. I get along well with the Yonko. Well, most of them." "Are they the same or did they get their titles stolen?" He was taking more interest in this than he thought he would, but it was exciting to learn about the future. "Different. Oh, Shanks is still a Yonko, though." "What about Oyaji?" Quote. Oh, the silence was the only answer he needed. "So the old man died, huh? Then who are the new ones?" He didn't want to dwell on who lived or died. That was one thing he didn't want to know. "Trafalgar Law. The supernova? He made it as a Yonko?" "Yep. Just recently, though." "Who else?" Luffy's smile brightened and he peered around the ship, keeping watch for any unwanted listeners. The last thing he needed was for Thatch to overhear him, again. This time he was also looking for a certain pineapple head. When he saw no one on deck, he leaned in close to his brother, being as secretive as possible. "Marco," he announced, snickering as he watched Ace's face drain of color and eyes widen to impossible levels. "No way," he shouted, resulting in a hand over his mouth as the older peered over his shoulder to make sure no one heard. He sighed when he realized, again, that no one was there. The last thing he wanted was for the Phoenix to find out and for that information to negatively affect his future. He liked having Marco as a Yonko. It meant that he didn't have to worry so much about the 4 emperors attacking his. Sure, he liked the occasional fight during his travels, but sometimes they wouldn't give him a break, like that stupid Yonko bastard from before. "Are you serious?" "Yep, wow." Ace wasn't really sure what else to say to that. Marco didn't seem ambitious enough to aim for the title of Yonko. Did he get it on accident or something? And who's the last one? "I don't know, but he attacked me." "Then how do you not know?" "He's new," Luffy shouted defensively with a pout. "He just gained his title 2 weeks ago and went after me." Ace blinked a few times before laughing. Luffy was the only one who could legitimately use that as an excuse. His older younger brother looked over at him with confusion, tilting his head before he laughed as well, though he didn't know what he was laughing at in the first place. He was just happy to see Ace smile. That was something lost in his memories. "So what happened when he attacked you?" "I kicked his ass," Ace let out another snicker. "But then he used this weird devil fruit ability and I ended up here." Now that the story was over, Ace's mind drifted over to something that had been bothering him for a while. "Luffy," he started, trying to think of the right words. He noticed his brother's face light up when he said his name, seeing as he hadn't done so before. "Where did you get that scar?" He turned and his finger gently rubbed against the skin on the Pirate King's chest. He saw the man visibly darken. What should he say? He couldn't tell him everything, right? He didn't want to. "It's from an admiral." Ace was pondering that, knowing that there were bits being left out. "It looks old." "It is. How long ago?" 10 years. "When would that be? According to this time, I mean." "In a year or so." "Oh." He thought for a moment, wondering how his brother managed to get into a fight with an admiral so soon after setting sail. He didn't know whether to be impressed or disappointed in him. "You're not going to tell me about my death, are you?" He had to pause to be sure of what he was going to say. It was all so foreign to him still. "No," Luffy replied, voice firm and solid. Ace sighed. "Didn't think so." Darkness began to fade into morn on the sweet horizon, bright colors dancing on the edge of the sea. By then even the night watch had drifted into sleep, leaving solitude on the main deck. Luffy found himself at Whitebeard's door. The old man asked earlier in the night to have a talk with him, but he'd only just then been able to get away from his brother. As much as he enjoyed being with Ace again, he couldn't help but think that the man was trying to make him reveal more information about the future. His brother spent the entire night asking questions about what would happen to his crew and how he would die, and it took everything Luffy had not to slip up. Sure, he told him some things voluntarily, but he resigned himself not to give anything more away. There was a nagging voice in the back of his head, sounding much like Robin, which told him that altering the future would be a horrible, horrible mistake. If it weren't for that, he would have told Ace about his death 1,000 times over in the hopes that he could change it. But that voice was right. Messing with time, nigh impossible as it was, could end up leading to a worse outcome than he remembered. More people could die. He didn't want anyone else's blood on his hands. He knocked hesitantly on the Yonko's door. Within moments he was ushered inside. The giant man sat at an equally large desk, filing through papers that most likely detailed the statuses of the crews he was allied with, as well as the locations of his many divisions. There was a huge bottle of grog placed next to his free hand, containing enough alcohol to drown the Straw Hat Captain. Newgate studied him from the corner of his eye before he turned to fully face the Pirate King. There was a barely visible smirk under his mustache. "You're late, brat," he declared, his heavy voice carrying proudly through the room. She. Sorry about that." Luffy bounced over to the bed and made himself comfortable, sitting on the mattress. "I just got away from Ace." "Gurarara," the man laughed. Luffy took a minute to study the Yonko. Having only seen him once before, he didn't remember much about him. So that was the strongest man in the world at the time, huh? He wondered how he'd fare against him in a fight, but quickly brushed that thought aside in favor of more pressing matters. "So what did you want to see me for?" "It's about our talk a few days ago." Luffy visibly winced at that. He knew what it was about. That first day after he was brought to the past, he was a nervous wreck. He'd hid his frantic worrying behind a calm, cheerful smile so that no one noticed, but after a while he needed someone to confide in, and that person was Whitebeard. He told him everything: Teach, Thatch, Ace's determination for revenge, the battle at Marineford, and all of the deaths throughout, up until the bitter end. There was something about the old man that was calming, and he was easy to talk to, despite his intimidating stature. The words just flew off his tongue naturally. Now, though, he was beginning to regret that talk. He eyed the giant bottle of alcohol on Newgate's desk. "See, can I have some of that?" He felt he'd needed to get through the rest of the night. As though he'd anticipated the question, the Yonko grabbed a mug from behind him and poured some of the liquid into it before handing it off to the Pirate King. They both took large swigs before continuing. "What do you want to know?" "When will Thatch be attacked?" the old man asked bluntly, refusing to say killed, as it would mean he was resigned to his son's fate. Not sure." The Pirate King found himself wishing that the Marco from his time was there. He was around for that incident and would be far more useful to the Yonko than Luffy could ever be. After all, he didn't really ask about the events leading up to the war, seeing how they were such a sensitive topic for the Whitebeard pirates of his time. It wasn't long after Ace became 2nd Division commander, "I know that." "So the boy accepts?" "Yep." Newgate's smirk grew. He had a feeling Ace would assume the role, but hearing that it was a certainty pleased him greatly. Something was causing him to hesitate, he knew, and so he had his doubts that he would agree to taking over that position. Maybe whatever it was that stopped him would be revealed in time. Still, he would have to make his decision soon, which meant that it wouldn't be long before Teach made his move. "Hey, Giant Awesome," Luffy began, scratching his head. He saw the old man acknowledge him and wondered how to word his question. He didn't want to come off wrong, especially if the man's strength lived up to the rumors. "Why did you stop me?" "When you attacked Teach." "Yeah, we wouldn't have to worry if the bastard was dead." He took another sip of rum and downed a good third of the mug. He listened to the Yonko back then but wasn't sure if he regretted it or not. He was conflicted. One side of him wanted to keep everything the same for fear of bringing about a worse future, and the other wanted to change it to save the many lives lost. Which was right. It was rare for him to hesitate like he did. "He's yet to do anything wrong, my boy, but he will. And when he does, we'll be prepared," he assured him, using one of his giant fingers to ruffle his head comfortingly. Though the Pirate King was 27, he was nothing more than another child of the sea to Newgate. That night, when Luffy opened up to him, the two gained a strong bond through their desire to protect Teach's future victims. He wasn't sure if the boy felt the same, but he'd begun to treat him as one of his sons, just like he did with the members of his crew and all of his allied forces. He still thought of him as a cocky brat, though. Luffy sighed. "I hope so. I really don't want to relive that." He stared back at his reflection in his beverage, silently playing the battles of Impel Down and Marineford over and over in his head. He'd done that a lot over the last decade, going over those events, thinking of all possible what-if situations. What if he went to find Ace when he first noticed his Vivre card burning? What if he arrived at Impel Down sooner? What if he didn't get hit by that poison? What if he found Ace's cell just a little bit earlier? What if he was stronger? What if he hadn't stopped when Akainu attacked? What if? Anything else, Asen? How long after does Ace get imprisoned? About a year, I think. I see. Is there anything else I should know? Well, there was one thing he neglected to mention during his ramblings that night. When you died, he took your ability. Silence. After a minute or so, Newgate let out a hearty laugh and slapped him on the back. "I appreciate the warning, Brad." She, no problem, Asen. They continued with idle chat for half an hour before Luffy decided to take his leave. When he opened the door, he caught his brother mid-knock. The two blinked at each other awkwardly before Luffy moved aside and let him in. He waved a casual goodbye and pondered staying before he inevitably proceeded onto the deck. He had a feeling he knew why Ace was there and didn't want to negatively affect his talk with his captain. Ace watched the closed door for a second before he turned back to Whitebeard. "Why was he here?" he asked, staring curiously at the Yonko. "Nothing for you to worry about, son," he assured with a fatherly smile, eliciting a similar one on Fire Fist's face. "What is it?" "Oh, well," he fumbled with his words, wondering how to phrase his next sentence. It was evidence in his aversion to eye contact that he was nervous, worried, even. "I need to talk to you about something. It's, kind of important." "Go on." Now that he'd finally mustered up the courage to face the old man, he was starting to second-guess himself. He wanted to back out and forget he even brought it up, and the fact that he was being so tactless wasn't helping with his unease. It was rare for him to act as aversive as he was, and he knew his captain could see right through him. "Oyaji, I'm actually Oi," he commanded, though his voice no more demanding than it usually was. If he didn't encourage him to speak, they would be there all night. "I'm the son of Gold D. Roger." After those words left his mouth, Ace found himself shutting his eyes tightly in anticipation of the verbal bashing he was sure would follow. Oyaji would be pissed and would kick him off the Moby. He'd hate him. He was so sure, yet all that followed was amused laughter.
His eyes shot open and he looked to his captain with confusion. "Is that so? What a surprise. You don't really act like Roger, though."
"Weren't you two enemies? Aren't you gonna throw me out? When you said you had something important to talk about, I thought it would be bigger than this." It doesn't matter who your parents were. Everyone is a child of the sea, Gurarara." As Whitebeard laughed, Ace couldn't help but smile. That was the first time since his journey began that he'd confided that information to anyone, and the response was far more than he ever hoped. He was accepted. Despite his lineage, he was welcomed into the crew, and he could make his decision. "Then, I suppose the offer for 2nd Division Commander is still open," he said, looking hopefully at the Yonko. He was ready to accept. "Of course, Ace," Newgate replied, grinning at the most recent addition to his family. After a few more words his son left and, though he was glad the boy accepted the offer, his concern was growing. If what Luffy said was true, it would only be a matter of time before Teach made his move. Everything would soon be set into motion. Luffy smiled from the figurehead as he watched the Whitebeard crew cheer and congratulate his brother who was readily stuffing his face with the celebratory spread Thatch prepared for him. His stomach growled furiously in response to the tantalizing aroma wafting his nose, but, for one of the only times in his life, he didn't rush over to the food. He didn't budge. That was one of the happiest times of Ace's life, and he wasn't about to ruin it but childishly stealing his food. That could wait until tomorrow. He let out a bit of a laugh when his brother souk-bed to his narcolepsy in the middle of eating, eliciting laughs from his comrades. How long ago did he last see the freckled man so carefree? It was great seeing the burden of Roger's name was being lifted from Ace's shoulders, though that name still led to his execution. As the group of pirates continued on merrily, poking and prodding their sleeping comrade, Luffy's gaze turned hard. He glared darkly at the dark-skinned man sitting across the bow, Teach. Ace accepted the position of 2nd Division Commander, which meant that they were running out of time. It wouldn't be long before Teach made his move. What was it that caused him to act? Why did he kill Thatch and escape? Luffy mentally kicked himself for never asking Marco about the reason behind the attack. He didn't like bringing up anything related to the 4th Division Commander's death, though. But if he had, maybe they could do something. Maybe. "Hungry?" asked a familiar, deep voice. Luffy looked away from the traitor to the redhead in front of him who was holding out a plate, smiling. Quickly the Pirate King jumped down from the figurehead and snatched his hand towards the food. "Meat," he cheered, eliciting a laugh from the older. Thatch couldn't help but give an amused grin when he saw the look of bliss that crossed the younger's face. Did it really taste that good? The thought made him proud. He was the head chef, after all. "There's more if you're still hungry," he stated, taking a seat next to the Pirate King. "Thanks, she. Luffy smiled at the redhead in a show of gratitude as he devoured everything on the plate. "I should be thanking you," he replied with a chuckle. Why?" Thatch grinned and threw his arms behind his head in a lax manner, watching his family eat and drink a little ways away. He looked fondly at Marco as he swung his arm around Ace's shoulders, saying something. "For telling me about my death. Might be able to avoid it," he mused. "I didn't tell you. You eavesdropped. Hey, sorry about that, by the way."
Be careful. Yeah, I know. The redhead peered at the traitor from the corner of his vision, eyes narrowing in distrust. He wondered why Teach would try something like that. He was a member of the Whitebeard pirates for more than a decade. "I'll put him in his place if his tries it."
"Here," Ace said as he stopped at the second last door in the corridor. Luffy followed quickly after with an eager expression. The freckled pirate entered the room first and motioned for his brother to do the same. Seeing as he trusted the Pirate King, he was going to allow him to share his room, at least until they could make room for him somewhere else. Having hundreds of men staying aboard, the Moby had no room left in the living quarters for Luffy to sleep, and forcing him to stay on deck constantly felt cruel. Having just become 2nd Division Commander, Ace was given his own room. The space was large enough to fit 2 beds, and some of the men from the 5th Division prepared a second for their guest.
Luffy's eyes were alight as he scanned over the room. He never saw his brother's private quarters, seeing as he was never on the old Moby before his little time travel incident. He'd been on the new Moby, the one under Marco's command, plenty of times, but it wasn't the same.
"You sure it's okay?" he asked the commander, ceasing his investigation in favor of looking towards the other. Ace blinked. "Why wouldn't it be? It's just," Luffy was surprised when Ace made that offer. Sure, they had been getting along, but it was hardly enough to warrant sharing a room. While Ace trusted him, he was also wary and could tell that the older was making a conscious effort to dodge his questions and thought it would put some distance between them, but that wasn't the case. "We're brothers, right?" Once more Luffy's face brightened. That was the first time the commander addressed that. Over his stay he noticed that Ace would rarely call him by name and never referred to him as his brother. It looked like he was finally adjusted to the idea. Nothing could make the Pirate King happier. Instinctively the bug-eyed man latched onto the younger and wrapped him in an embrace. "Oh oi," Ace began with a start, jumping a little at the sudden touch. He stood there, dumbfounded, unsure of what to do. He was used to Luffy hugging him. He did it all the time when they were kids. But that Luffy was different. It was awkward to be held by the older man. "Thanks," Luffy said quietly, gripping tighter to his brother's form. Ace calmed and his eyes softened. He wondered what was going on in the Pirate King's mind. It seemed that his death affected his little brother greatly. He often caught him looking his way with sorrowful eyes. What did it feel like to meet someone who was dead? Pondering that, he returned the older man's hug with a smile. Even after so many years, Luffy was still the same. "Huh? What kind of brother would I be if I kicked you out?" "A jerk," Luffy replied teasingly. Oi, Marco, Ace and Luffy found themselves leaning on the rail, watching as the 4th Division returned from its mission. The members were hauling their loot onto the main deck and the others aboard were searching through it to see what their comrades found. They'd been gone for just about a week, so it was a relief to have them back. Thatch climbed aboard from one of the smaller ships, chest in hand, smiling cheerily as he meandered over to his friends. He and Ace immediately started talking and telling each other what was going on. "What's that?" Marco asked, interrupting their conversation. He pointed to the box in the redhead's hand. "Oh, this?" Thatch pulled his hand forward and lifted the lid, pulling something out. He held tightly to the swirly, purple fruit as he eagerly showed it off to his comrades. "A devil fruit?" Ace asked with wide eyes. They were rare, even in the New World. Sure, he had found and ate one, but that was completely on accident. He swallowed and almost choked on it while sleepwalking on a foreign island back when he was captain of the Spade Pirates. Sure, finding one wasn't unheard of, but it was still a pleasant surprise when you did. "Well, what is it?" "Still have to figure it out." "You gonna eat it, Yoi?" Marco questioned, taking a vested interest in the fruit. "Dunno. I'm not really interested in becoming an anchor like you guys. I might if it's a good one, though." As they continued discussing the fruit, Luffy couldn't help the wave of unease that washed over his body. He never saw the devil fruit before but had a feeling its appearance was a bad omen. Something was going to happen and it wasn't going to be good. All he could do, though, was sit back and wait. Luffy's eyes peered out into the darkness of the room. He couldn't seem to fall back asleep for whatever reason and instead sat up, wondering if a stroll on deck would help clear his mind. There was so much to think about. He wanted to know what the cause for Teach's betrayal was, or rather, the specific thing he gained from killing Thatch in his time. He also wanted to know how long it would be until he could return home. He didn't want to rush. He liked being able to see his brother, alive, but he couldn't help but worry about his crew. He was set back in time in the midst of a battle with a Yonko. What if something happened? Sighing, he ran a finger through his matted strands and turned to his brother's bed. Blinking owlishly, he saw that it was empty. With curiosity getting the best of him, he picked himself up off the mattress and strolled out into the hall. He heard voices from above, shouting. Deciding that was the best place to look, he headed up the stairs. "Not going to sit back and do nothing," that was Ace's voice, wasn't it? He took a few more steps up the stairs and gazed onto the deck. A crowd had formed, solemnly watching the exchange between captain and commander. Ace looked absolutely livid. Luffy knew the cause immediately. "Think about this, Yoi," the first mate interrupted. "You would." "I don't care, he killed him, Marco. All for a damned fruit." Ace lowered his hat over his eyes, hiding the scowl and rage that entered his expression. And he'd tarnished his father's name. With that, the second commander spun around and headed towards the end of the ship. He stopped momentarily when he was met with the face of his brother, silently pleading for him to stay. Biting his lip, he passed. "Ace, I'm going," the freckled youth replied, voice unwavering as he hopped onto the rail and down, taking off on Striker with no hesitation. Luffy swallowed and clenched his fists. Ace left. He left and there was nothing to do. Despite all of the knowledge he shared, it still happened, and Thatch. Brow furrowed, he turned to Newgate. Despite knowing everything, he didn't seem to care that Ace left. In fact, Marco was the same. Why?
"What happened?" Luffy asked, clenching his fist. He didn't want to hear it. He asked, but he already knew. Thatch was dead. Ace was gone. It was worse knowing that after getting to know the 4th Division commander and already experiencing the result of that event.
Teach attacked Thatch and took off Yoi, Marco replied, arms folded casually. So, then, Thatch was dead. Ace was gone. He's alive. Luffy's eyes shot up to look at the blonde, both with shock and confusion. Did he hear him right? Thatch got stabbed but managed to avoid anything too serious. He's resting in the infirmary, Yoi. But Ace, he doesn't know, Whitebeard chimed in, watching the Pirate King from his chair. Why? His voice grew frantic, wondering why they would keep something like that knowing what happened in his time. We can't change things recklessly, brat, Marco took a few steps forward, approaching the owlish pirate calmly. If we're going to save Ace, we have to make sure everything happens as it was supposed to so that we know what to alter later, Yoi. So you're going to wait until his execution? Exactly, the blonde answered. But we couldn't do anything. Even with all of the Whitebeard pirates' allies, we still lost. But now we know what happens, Newgate explained. We can change it. If we were to do something now, we wouldn't know what kind of future that would bring. But Luffy lowered his head and clenched his fist tighter. He didn't want to make Ace experience all of that. The stay in impelled down nor taking his spot on the execution stand. Did he have a choice, though? Again Robin's words resounded throughout his mind. They managed to save Thatch, but would that be enough? We're not going to let him die, Yoi. He's our brother, too. The tension released from the Pirate King's shoulders as he looked around at the concerned faces of the crew. He was no longer Ace's only family. Alright, I'll trust you, Giant Asen. Gurarara, wise choice, Brad. Luffy gripped the knob to the infirmary door and turned it slowly, so as to not disturb the one inside. He peered across the room at the bed that held the bandaged redhead, sighing in relief when he found what the first mate said to be true: he was alive. He walked in and quietly shuffled to a seat. "I'm awake, you know," stated a familiar voice. The Pirate King blinked down at the patient who was flashing a lopsided smile. He grinned down at him, giving his usual laugh and holding out his hand. The chef latched onto it and they stayed there in silence. "We did it," Luffy shouted cheerily. They both burst into relieved, excited laughter. "You're alive." "I know," and Ace still ran off. There was a pause, then a sigh. "I know. That kid's going to be the death of me someday." "I wouldn't be saying that after what happened." "Point taken," Thatch replied. Groaning as he shifted, he threw his arms behind his head in a more comfortable pose. "Guess this means I've been granted a few extra years," he said with a laugh. Luffy scrunched up his nose and furrowed his brow. "Longer than that. I want to see you on the Moby back in my time," he said. Thatch raised an eyebrow and looked over at the younger man with amusement. "You mean where Marco's captain?" At first the Pirate King was surprised by that, but then he realized what happened. Ace, despite keeping the secret of his lineage from most anyone he could, he apparently couldn't keep the fact that his crewmate took over for Newgate. "Ace," Thatch confirmed with a nod. Luffy sighed. He never saw that side of his brother before, where he couldn't bear to keep something to himself. Ace was always very secretive and liked to keep to himself. He knew he changed after joining the Whitebeard pirates, but they met so little in those last few years that he never got to see to what extent. "So he told you Marco became a Yonko?" "He what?" Thatch asked as he shot up in bed with wide-eyed, cringing and gripping his wound when pain shot through his torso. The pirate blinked. "He didn't. Marco? A Yonko? Our Marco?" The commander raised a hand to his forehead in a show of disbelief. She. His reaction was more amusing than Ace's. "I can't believe it, just Marco of all people, but don't tell," Luffy commanded, raising a finger to his mouth. Thatch nodded with a determined look on his face as he lied back down on the mattress, still mulling that bit of information over in his head. Before another word could be said, the door opened. In came an all too familiar blonde pineapple. He stared blankly at them, wondering why they were giving him strange looks. After a while he decided to ignore it. Logic rarely applied to those two. "How you feeling?" "Fine," Thatch answered nervously. "Just, well, what yoy?" Thatch glanced over at Luffy, who was giving him a "don't you dare" kind of look. "It's nothing." "Marco," the Pirate King interrupted before the redhead could let something slip. "What did the old guy say?" The first mate rolled his eyes at the way the younger spoke about the old man, then shook his head. "He doesn't want you to leave yet." "What? Why?" Earlier Luffy discussed chasing after Ace with Newgate, but the Yonko didn't seem too thrilled about the idea. Still, the Pirate King felt uneasy with Ace being out on his own, knowing what would eventually happen. "Just give it time, yoy. You really think he wants to see you when he thinks Thatch is dead? He has a temper. But wait until Oyaji says to. Then you can go with Ace, alright?" Luffy pouted. He didn't like that. He didn't want his brother out of his sight for that long. But he knew that he had to trust the old man. After all, what did he know about planning? It wasn't exactly his strong point. So, despite his reluctance, he nodded. Luffy grinned like a madman from his place on the figurehead of the Moby, laughing to himself in anticipation. Finally he could leave. Finally he could search for Ace. It had been a while, but the old man was allowing him to go out and join his brother. Maybe change a few things he wasn't supposed to along the way. That he would have to keep to himself, though. Breathing in deeply, his lungs filled with the sea air. It felt nostalgic, especially seeing that he was in the past. He wanted to savor it while he could because he knew his next stop would be Alabasta. Spending a while in those deserts was sure to exhaust him just as it did before. Staying for long voyages on land wasn't really his idea of a good time. Still, he had no choice. He had no idea where Ace was at that point, and since the man didn't bother to take a damn den mushi with him, there was no way of contacting him, nor pinpointing his location, so he'd have to wait to run into him in the desert. Briefly he wondered if Ace missed them, Luffy and the Whitebeard pirates. He'd been gone for so long already yet never bothered to contact them. Was he still fuming over what Teach did, or had he calmed down? More importantly, would he get mad when his brother demanded they travel together? Luffy's unwavering grin started to sag a little. Ace probably wouldn't like having his older younger brother there. He'd feel like he was being babysat, and by the boy who never won in a fight against him, no less. The Pirate King mused the thought for a while. Sure, he didn't win against him when they were children, but he was sure he would if they fought then. He was the strongest man to sail the sea in his time. But he wasn't invincible. As much as he'd love to spar with Ace again after so many years, he wasn't sure if he could. His brother was strong, but Luffy saw him die. Even though he tried to be strong, just thinking about it scared him. He wasn't willing to fight him, not after just getting him back. What if he lost him, again? "Ah!" the pirate shouted, scrunching up his face and shaking his head. There was no time to worry about that. He had to leave soon, to find Ace. If he truly wanted to save his brother, he had to keep his calm, even if that wasn't the easiest thing for him to do. Ace knew he was going to die but didn't know when or where. He was moving forward blind. That meant it was up to Luffy to protect him, even if his brother didn't like it. Alright, the Pirate King shouted again, stretching his arms into the air. He was starting to get pumped up again. He would keep Ace safe. That was his mission. Then, when he returned to his time, maybe Ace would be waiting for him. Maybe he would get his brother back. Laughing from behind him brought Luffy away from his internal pep talk. He blinked at the sound then turned to face it, met with the smiling faces of the 4th Division commander and first mate. "What are you getting all excited for?" Thatch asked, taking interest in the Pirate King's outburst. Luffy's face curved into a grin. "It's 'cause I get to see Ace, she. Marco shook his head, amused, before walking up to the man sitting on the whale figurehead, offering a backpack. "This is for your journey, Yoi." "Is there meat?" the Phoenix sighed. "Yes, Luffy, there's meat." "Made it all myself," the redhead chimed. Luffy eyed the bag momentarily, scrutinizing it. "It's small." The pirate pouted. "That's not going to last me all the way till Alabasta." "Deal with it, Yoi." "But I'll starve." Marco sighed and rubbed his temple in the hope of quelling his ensuing headache. "Then take a fishing rod and catch your own food, Yoi. If he gave you your fill, we'd have nothing left on board." The pirate seemed to consider that before his grin returned. She. Okay." The first mate let out a breath of relief, then tossed the bag into the arms of the other. "We're giving you one of our smaller boats," Thatch began, throwing his arms behind his head. "It's no match for Striker, but it's still pretty fast. If you know where you're going you should be able to beat him there." Again, Luffy's face sagged. "I'm a horrible navigator," Nami said so herself. They ignored the part about the girl they didn't know. "Will you be alright?" He nodded. "Good," the redhead continued. "I would hate to meet a pirate king who couldn't find his way through the Grand Line," he teased. "Oi, either way," Marco interrupted, "remember your deal with Oyaji, Yoi." Luffy thought about that for a moment before giving the blonde a far less energetic nod. One of the terms he agreed to in order to go see his brother was that he would return to the Moby periodically throughout his journey, even if it meant separating from Ace. It was the Pirate King's job to keep track of where they went and what they found. When they regrouped he was to update them on everything that happened. Whitebeard would alter his plan according to any new developments. That way they could assure to a fuller extent that nothing would interfere with their rescue of the fire user. As much as Luffy didn't want to part with his sibling, he knew it was best for him to do so. Absently he accepted a baby Den Mushi from Marco. He stared at it momentarily, noting the ASCE lightly etched into its shell before slipping it into his bag. "Give that to Ace," the blonde commanded. "If he has that we'll be able to keep track of you too, Yoi." "Alright, and remember what Oyaji told you. No changing things, Yoi." Luffy rolled his eyes. "I know, Marco," he stated. It was true. He was fully aware of what the Yonko said to him. That didn't mean he was inclined to listen, though. If he were to stumble upon a favorable situation he would take it wholeheartedly. But he would keep quiet about it, for fear of another lecture from the blonde. Marco may have been his nakama and drinking buddy but he was too strict. "Hurry, I want to go see Ace." The first mate gave him a weary look before gesturing for the younger to follow him. "You won't see him right away, you know." "I know that." He paused. Before allowing the commander to lead him to the boat he would take, he turned to look at Whitebeard. The captain was sitting in his chair as usual, a bottle of sake in his hand, much to horror of his nurses. Luffy smiled at him then waved. "Thanks for everything, old man." "Cheeky brat," Newgate mumbled as his mouth curved into a smirk. "Get going." It was a hot day, hotter than any other since Luffy set out. With not a cloud in the sky, the sun beating mercilessly down on his small, wooden boat, everything seemed nostalgic. If it weren't for his inability to swim he would have dove into the water for a chance to cool down. The Pirate King found himself lying against the deck of the small ship, arms and legs spread out in all directions. He breathed shallow breaths, tongue hanging from the corner of his mouth. There was no food left, hadn't been for a while. It had been so long since he had to cook for himself that he forgot how terrible he was. Sure he could do the basics like frying a couple of sea kings but otherwise his skills were lacking. Oh how he missed Sanji and the magic he worked in the kitchen. He was regretting not dragging Thatch along. That guy made amazing meals, too. He wasn't sure how many days had passed since he left the Moby. At some point he lost track. His homesickness was getting stronger. Being out there on the sea, all alone, had him missing the crew he left in the future. How were they doing? So much time had passed since the day he fought that Yonko and ended up where he was. They all got out of that battle alright on their own, didn't they? He was sure they did. He may have held the title of the strongest but they were all capable of protecting themselves. In fact, were it not for them he never would have obtained that title. Yeah, they were fine. He still missed them, though. Tap. Luffy would have given up half of his meat if it meant he could hear one of Brook's songs. It didn't matter which. Be it Bink's Sake, New World or any in between AR1. He wanted to dance along to the music and sing with Usopp and Chopper, goof around on deck until lunch was ready. Tap. They would all gather in the mess hall to eat. He would get yelled at by Sanji for trying to steal Nami and Robin's food, probably followed by a kick to his skull. Then he'd give up and go after Zoro's plate. But, well, Zoro was really good at guarding his food. Luffy probably would succeed. Still, there were other members of the crew he could steal from, like Frankie and Tap Tap. "Ah!" Luffy shouted as he shot up from lying on the wood, causing the birds pecking at his head to scatter and fly off into the air. He eyed them with irritation, hating that his daydream was interrupted. Stupid birds. Looking out onto the water, Luffy's eyes widened. He took back whatever internal curses he had for those birds. It was because of them that he was seeing what he was, an island off in the distance, approaching quickly. Or, well, he was approaching it. But forget technicalities. He couldn't contain his excitement. Finally he was nearing land. He loved the sea, but spending that long alone made solid ground look so inviting. Glancing down at the eternal pose resting beside his leg, his mouth widened into the brightest smile he could manage. That was Alabasta. He'd finally reached the desert island he'd been searching for. There he would meet Ace, and Luffy blinked. The first time he saw his brother after he set out to become a pirate was at Alabasta. Then, his younger self would be there, right? His crew? Would he be able to meet them? He wanted to, even if he couldn't say who he was. Even if they didn't recognize him. They were his nakama, his family. Other than the 2 years they spent apart after the Marineford War, he hadn't been away from them for very long. 10 years they were together. Seeing them became a part of everyday life. Being separated from them for so long, it was hard. With the island coming closer and closer, Luffy brought his thoughts back to the situation. He shoved his hand into his pocket and rummaged around. When he eventually removed it, there, between his fingers, was a tiny piece of paper with Edward Newgate scribbled on one side. Seeing that brought up a lot of old memories. "Keep it with you, always." Unfolding the paper, he smoothed over its creases and stared. He didn't use Viver cards much, not since back then. Whenever he wanted to find someone, he could usually figure out where they were on his own. Holding one wasn't very comfortable for him. Despite his dislike for the cards, he made an exception just that once. That time he wouldn't allow it to become a burden. He wouldn't make it into a mistake. That small, seemingly insignificant scrap of paper would help him save his brother. He was certain. They could do it. "It'll allow us to meet again. I'll make sure of it. This isn't real, is it?" The Pirate King gaped at the green-haired man standing in front of him, giving him a confused look. "Oi, you coming, Captain?" Luffy blinked. "Ah, yeah." His voice trailed as the gears turned in his head, wondering just how he got himself into that situation. But Zoro didn't seem to notice. Should he play along? Should he pretend to be the crew's captain? Well, he was the captain, but he wasn't then. Messing with the past to such an extent had to be a mistake. He had to get out of there. If he did, though, wouldn't that be more suspicious? Going along with it for a little while wouldn't hurt, right? The swordsman eyed him suspiciously and he flinched. Did he realize? What? Luffy managed to choke out. Oh, how he hoped he didn't discover the truth. Zoro's eyes narrowed. "You look kind of," after a few moments of staring, he shrugged. "It's nothing." With that, he turned and started walking away. The Pirate King let out a breath of relief and followed his crewmate tiredly. He'd been in Alabasta for almost a week waiting for his brother. It seemed he was far ahead, though, because Ace never showed. Or maybe he was already there and Luffy just kept missing him. Then, only 10 minutes ago, he ran into Roronoa Zoro, his first mate. Only, it was the Zoro from the past, not the future. He recognized Luffy immediately but assumed him to be the one he knew, not the one 10 years from then. Apparently he didn't notice the changes much, which was strange. But Luffy would go with it. Still, as happy as he was to see the man, he couldn't help but worry. How much would the past change because of their encounter? What if they realized? What would that affect? Luffy wasn't the type of guy to worry about the consequences of his actions all that much, but he was there to save Ace. He didn't want to change anything that might put him in danger. What if? "Who's that?" Luffy's ears were met with a familiar sound. A voice. At some point he stopped walking along with the one in front of him. He had to think a few seconds before placing the speaker as Sanji. If he were in his time he would have immediately demanded lunch. But, as luck had it, Sanji wasn't coming to the same conclusion as the first mate. "Huh?" Zoro raised an eyebrow. "What are you talking about? It's Luffy." When the Pirate King raised his head he saw his crew members' eyes widen. They were all there, Zoro, Sanji, Usopp, Chopper and Nami. Vivi was there, too, off to the side. He couldn't tell whether they were fooled or not. Judging by how guarded their expressions became, they weren't. And, as much as he wanted to hang around them for a while, he knew it wasn't likely to happen. They were on edge, just like back when he went after Crocodile with his crew. They wouldn't trust him so easily and it was probably better that way. He missed them, though. Giving them a weak smile, Luffy waved. "Hey," he greeted, watching as their muscles tensed. "Zoro," Usopp began, moving to hide behind the blonde cook. "That's not Luffy." You guys are, it's not him, Nami stated. He's taller than Luffy. His complexion's darker, and that scar, she pointed to his chest. They were mistaking him for an enemy, weren't they? Well, that wasn't surprising. Bond could transform into other people. Oh, wait, had they met him at that point? It was so long ago, but either way, a lot of people were after them and someone showed up who looked eerily like their captain. Yeah, he couldn't blame them. Sanji took his cigarette between 2 fingers, shoving his free hand into his pocket as he blew out a puff of smoke. Who are you, you shitty imposter? Luffy folded his arms and scrunched his face into a pout. He didn't like being told he was a bad imposter of himself, and he didn't want to fight them. Back then, they were really weak, weren't they? He'd be scared to hurt them. Of course, he would never say that to their faces, especially Zoro or Sanji. They'd kill him, or try. But after 10 years, his time in Alabasta felt like nothing. Crocodile almost killed him in the past, but after he became the Pirate King he couldn't even consider him a threat. What to do? Lucy, they deadpanned. Well, he lies like Luffy, Usopp said with a sigh. He was starting to relax. She, he wasn't going to last, was he? He missed them so much, and even just being with them for a few minutes he wanted to blurt out the truth. They were his nakama, and being away from them for so long, it was hard. Marco and the old guy wouldn't be too mad at him, would they? That's 'cause I am Luffy. To prove his point, he grabbed the side of his mouth and pulled, stretching it in his usual fashion and watching as they all gaped. They were all well aware that 2 of the same devil fruit couldn't exist at the same time. After showing his abilities, they wouldn't be able to deny it. That didn't mean they'd blindly accept it, though. Just what he'd expect of his crew. Zoro was the first to break the silence after Luffy's skin bounced back into place. I told you, he said simply. The Pirate King couldn't help but feel a little relieved. Even with how much he changed over the years, his first mate could still tell who he was. No questions asked. It was nice. The rest, however, they would need a while to adjust. Not that he was planning on staying long enough for them to do so. Why you're really, but look at you. What happened? Usopp asked, gesturing to his Marineford scar. You're so different, we just saw you an hour ago, Nami stated, looking him up and down. Well, Luffy scrunched up his face and plopped cross-legged on the ground, leaning against the side of a building. How should he word it? He had to be careful. Oh, who cared? He'd already royally screwed himself over. No point in hiding it now. It's been 10 years, so of course I change. Their mouths dropped again, all except Zoro's. He seemed content with the information. Ah, right. I'm from the future. Makes sense, Zoro said, folding his arms and closing his eyes, giving a curt nod of approval. How? Usopp and Nami shouted with irritation. It's Luffy, the swordsman replied simply. They nodded. Sadly, that really did make sense. Luffy knew by the looks on their faces that they were about to ask him a bunch of questions, and he was horrible at keeping secrets. He had to get away. But he was hungry. He wanted to eat Sanji's cooking. Wait, hungry, there was something. Ah, he noised in realization as he rose to his feet. When he first met Ace in Alabasta he was hungry. He was separated from his crew, as well. Smiling, he located his brother. Without a word to his baffled crew members, he took off at top speed. Following his nose, he came across a vaguely familiar scent. It floated through the air along with aromas from all the stands and shops around the city. Having a nose trained to sift through all other smells to locate food, he didn't even have to put an effort into discovering what direction the restaurant was in. After that he ran. Several minutes later found him at the entranceway to the place he would meet his brother. Taking a deep breath, he stepped inside. A crowd had formed around the place, each individual fixated on one specific part of the room. They whispered about something called a desert strawberry. Luffy hadn't a clue what that was, but he didn't care, either. He was more interested in the person in question, who allegedly dropped dead in the middle of a conversation. While eating, no less. Grinning, the Pirate King walked past the gathering and to the back of the restaurant, sitting 2 seats away from the dead man wearing a bright orange hat. He refrained from looking at him, knowing that he shouldn't reveal himself so soon. After all, it would only be a few minutes until his past self would show up, right? He had to try not to mess that up. At least, he'd done enough damage for the time. Suddenly the corpse's head sprung up, alarming the crowd as he stared off in a daze. Shouts of, "He came back to life," echoed T-linking a few times. He looked left and right before wiping his face on a woman's skirt. The woman screamed and ran off, but Ace didn't really care. Instead he just groaned. Damn, I fell asleep. The crowd was bewildered, but eventually they lost interest and dispersed. He was talking with some of the onlookers before, once more, his head hit the table, eliciting more annoyance than concern. Through it all Luffy just smiled next to him, remaining silent. With how often he was having narcoleptic attacks, it was likely his brother wouldn't notice him immediately. He'd be too out of it. That was fine. He wanted to wait until Ace greeted his younger self, anyways. It would be weird seeing himself, but it would be so cool, too. It wasn't long after Fire Fist woke a second time that Smokey arrived. They exchanged a few words about Luffy before the Marine put his devil fruit ability to use, preparing to attack the commander. Through it all, Ace remained calm and relaxed, leisurely taking in the encounter without noticing his older younger brother off to the side. "And you're a pirate?" Luffy clued into the conversation right when Smoker said that. It had him turning his head to catch a glimpse. Smokey looked so young. "What a dumb reason," Ace stated, grinning all the while. Slowly he raised his head, revealing a cocky grin. "Shall we have some fun, then?" Before the other had a chance to reply, with neither moving from their spots, Luffy faintly heard one of his attacks being called from outside the restaurant. He was certain of what came next and turned away so that his face wouldn't be visible. "This is it." "Rocket!" shouted a younger, higher-pitched Luffy as he came flying in through the front door, crashing into Smoker and Ace and sending them both flying through the wall. The Pirate King grinned. He didn't remember doing that, actually. The look on Ace's face was hilarious. "A restaurant," the younger shouted. "I finally found one." Being reminded of that made the Pirate King's stomach growl. He was so hungry, and Sanji was only a short run away, and he was in a restaurant, but he had to wait, to keep quiet, didn't have to like it, though. "Now I can eat. I'm starving," the older pirate pouted. "No fair." Immediately the rookie ran up to the bar and sat on the stool next to his counterpart, ignoring everything around him in favor of his appetite. "Asen, food, food, food. Hurry." Eventually his younger self started something of a chant, demanding to be fed immediately. When he was stuffing his face, the chef warned him, telling him to get out of there because he just sent a marine and a notorious pirate flying through the wall. Apparently he hadn't realized he did it, nor did he care. Well, that was just like him. Vaguely the Pirate King could hear Ace's voice from far off. He couldn't make out what was said, but it sounded like cursing or complaining, followed by a very formal and polite tone. Was he apologizing for something? Ace can be so weird sometimes. Only seconds later did the irritated commander appear in the hole in the wall, searching for whoever sent him flying as the people in the building vacated out of fear. His face brightened tremendously and he took a step forward. "Lou." Smoker came from behind and slammed his head into the ground. Straw Hat immediately ran off after registering who he was and the marine followed close behind, leaving the Whitebeard pirate in the dust. He picked himself up from amongst the rubble, once more cursing as he realized his brother was now gone. Brushing himself off, Ace took a step forward, ready to chase after the rubbery brat. "Oi, Lou," he stopped, cutting himself off as he stared at the man sitting on a bar stool, smiling at him. His eyes widened as he took in the Pirate King's appearance. "Luffy." The pirate flashed him a toothy grin. "Hey, Ace," he greeted casually before grabbing some small leftovers his counterpart hadn't been able to shove into his mouth. The commander blinked, stepping nearer to the man. "What are you doing here?" Immediately Luffy's face sagged into a pout. "Looking for you," he explained. "WH. You shouldn't have run off like that, stupid." It was rare for him to use such a childish tone now that he was older, but Luffy wasn't sure what else to do to stop from lashing out at his brother. After spending so many years without him and seeing him make the same horrible mistake of chasing after Blackbeard, he wanted nothing more to yell at the pirate like a scolding parent. But Luffy wasn't like that, and, though he wasn't sure he agreed with it, Ace running off was part of the giant Asen's plan, so he would go along with it. But that didn't mean he would just pretend like everything was alright. It wasn't. It wouldn't be until Ace was safe. "You should listen to your captain, Ace." The commander furrowed his brow and pulled his mouth into a taut line. "I." "Save it," Luffy interrupted, inhaling the bits of food still left on the plate. Despite the lax atmosphere created by his eating, his tone wasn't very like himself. Instead it seemed almost dangerous, holding silent fury and disappointment, something akin to scolding. "I don't want excuses and I don't want you to rationalize what you did. Besides, you should probably get going." "Huh?" Ace questioned absently. He seemed more focused on the tone his brother was using. Luffy rarely acted according to his title and age. He was a childish adult and too laid back to be a proper pirate king, many criticized. But, despite how he usually acted, he could fit his role when need be. "He's getting away and he can't take Smoker by himself," the pirate stated, finishing the last bit of scraps on the plate. Ace's eyes widened as he realized what his brother was saying. "Shit," he cursed, dashing out of the restaurant and following the trail of the two who left him behind. Luffy watched him go, then sighed. He didn't mean to act all serious and out of character, but Ace was being stupid. Though he would have done the same in his position, had he not seen his brother die because of the brash decision to hunt the traitor down. They were both like that, ever since they were kids. No one should ever get away with hurting Nakama, but putting himself in danger to get revenge wasn't a good solution. Eyeing the empty plates littering the countertop, Luffy glanced at the back room and grinned. Since the owner was gone, he wouldn't mind if the Pirate King made himself a little snack. Would he? Who the hell is he? Why is he helping us? Usopp asked, looking back at Fire Fist as he stood between them and Smoker, flames licking his skin. "Ace," their captain exclaimed in surprise, eyes resting on his brother's back. The Whitebeard commander turned to face the boy, grinning all the while. You never change, Luffy. Ace, it's Ace, Luffy announced as the sight finally registered in his mind. You ate a devil fruit? Yeah, the narcoleptic confirmed. The Mara no mi. Marines flocked over to Smoker, asking for his orders. Anyways, we can't talk like this. I'll catch up later. Run for it. I'll keep these guys busy. Let's go, the Straw Hat captain commanded as he spun on his heel and dashed off in the other direction, his crew following suit. The Pirate King crouched down, watching as his young crew escaped towards the shore, his brother staying behind to fend off the attacking Marines. Deciding to stay and watch from the rooftop of a nearby building, he allowed his features to soften. Watching everything play out just as it had 10 years ago made him feel bitter. He recalled that day well, the day he was reunited with his big brother after 3 years of separation. It was a great day, filled with so much happiness and excitement. The admiration he held for Ace was renewed, seeing how strong he'd become since he set off. But that was also the last day they got to see each other before Marineford, before Ace. He bit his lip, trying to rid himself of the thought. There was no point in brooding over it. So long as the old man knew what he was doing, things would be different that time around. They would save Ace. He would make it back to his crew alive, and when Luffy returned to his time, hopefully he'd be there, waiting. Stupid memories, I don't get it, Smoker began, folding his arms as he glared at his foe. Why did you help Straw Hat? Ace's smirk widened, a small chuckle escaping his lips. Having a little brother who's a bit on the slow side makes me worry. What do you mean, younger brother, that means? The flames on the pirate's body engulfed him further, coming to life as he readied himself. Move, Portgas d'Ace, the Marine commanded. I don't think so. The battle between Fire Fist and Smokey was over quickly, seeing as their abilities cancelled each other out. Soon Ace was off chasing after the Pirate King's younger self, losing the Marines in the smoke and fire created by their clash. But Luffy saw where he ran off to and descended to the ground, beginning a pursuit of his own as he raced down side streets, hoping not to get noticed by any Marines running about, or members of Baroque Works. Several minutes later found the Pirate King running alongside his brother, grinning at the man. Luffy, Ace questioned, blinking. When did? Forget it, it doesn't matter. They pulled into an alley, managing to go unnoticed. Fire Fist peeked around the corner to search for pursuers and, seeing none, sighed. Look, I'm not going back, alright? Teach has to pay for what he did. Luffy's eyebrow twitched. He wanted so much to yell at the man. Tell him he was a stupid older brother and that his stubbornness would result in the loss of countless lives only months from then, but held his tongue. He wasn't one to get angry, nor was he supposed to reveal that information. He wanted to so badly. Marco said not to, though, and the pineapple was pretty reliable, at least in his time. He would trust him because the Whitebeard pirates were Ace's family, too. They wanted to save him and they were a lot smarter than Luffy, so it was best to listen to them. I'm not gonna bring you back, he said simply. Ace was a little dumbstruck by that. Quickly his expression shifted to a mix between curious and confused as he eyed his brother. Then why'd you come find me? The grin the Pirate King flashed would have split a normal person's face in half. I'm coming with you. What? The fire user sputtered, gawking with wide eyes at the older male. Why? No, wait, you're not coming. This isn't your problem, Luffy. It is my problem, the rubberman stated, voice running cold and serious as he did. It was his problem because it was Ace's problem. Ace was his problem, his family. Why? Luffy didn't expect him to ask. Going by what he was used to, his memories of the man. He assumed his words would be met with protest and a quick hit on the head, so he was surprised by the question. But then he realized that Ace probably suspected something was up. He knew that he died in the future, so of course he would be suspicious. The Pirate King needed to get out of answering. Pouting to relieve the tension in the air, Luffy began. They kicked me off the ship. Marco said I ate too much. That would convince him, right? Luffy was known for his legendary appetite. Ace couldn't deny that. Bullshit, his brother called, crossing his arms and furrowing his brow in disapproval of the lie. How did he know? They've accommodated my stomach for years. You're going to have to do better than that. He had a point. Then, Ace sighed, the sternness in his expression quickly slipping to concern. He knew something. It's fine. You don't want to tell me the reason, right? Sorry, Luffy murmured with an apologetic look on his face. He really hated how much he was keeping from his brother. Hell, he never even told him why he attacked Blackbeard the day he arrived in the past. It was starting to make him feel guilty. Don't be. It has to do with the future, doesn't it? He waited for the other's nod. Then it's fine. But I still don't want you traveling with me. Luffy's pout deepened. Why not? Because this isn't your fight, Ace stated, moving to lean against the wall. I don't want you getting involved. I won't fight, the Pirate King stated, not too sure he could keep to that promise when they met up with Teach. That didn't seem to convince his brother, though. The older pirate simply narrowed his eyes in disbelief. I'm going with you. Again, Ace sighed. Look, Lou, you're not changing my mind. Thatch was my nakama, too, you know. He hoped that sounded convincing. Damn his inability to lie well. But, looking at the hurt then sympathetic expression his sibling soon wore, he realized he might have done a good job. They stared at each other for a while, neither moving to glance away, before Ace broke under the Pirate King's gaze. Fine, fine, he conceded, scratching the back of his head. I'm not going to be able to convince you to leave, am I? She. Nope, then, I guess, for a little while. Thanks, Ace, you're our Luffy, right? Usopp asked, eyes narrowed on his captain, filled with suspicion. The teen blinked, tilting his head to the side. I don't know, am I? Nami sighed. He's ours, alright. Anyways, Zoro began. I'm not surprised you have a brother, but what's he doing in the Grand Line? The confusion slipped from Luffy's face, replaced with a bright smile as he sat cross-legged on Mary's rail. He's a pirate. He's looking for One Piece, he stated, looking to the sky as he began fondly reciting his past. Ace is 3 years older than me, so he left the island 3 years earlier. The crew could hear the fondness in his tone and was instantly aware of the admiration their captain held for his sibling. What are the odds of both of you eating devil fruits? Sanji asked, slumping against the wood of the ship as he smoked. I was surprised too. She. Luffy furrowed his brow, a look of pride entering his eyes. He didn't eat one before he left. Even then, I could never beat him in a fight. Ace is really strong. Not even once against a regular human? Nami asked, taken aback, knowing just how strong her captain was. It was a scary thought. The brother of a monster is an even bigger monster, Usopp stated, likely imagining just how scary Big Brother really was if even Luffy was no match for him. Yeah, I always got my ass kicked, she. But I could beat him now, the captain declared confidently. Laughing's a groundless statement, Zoro mumbled, going unheard by the other pirate. Just who, came a different voice before a figure shot up to the side of the ship, causing the captain to slip from his perch on the rail as he landed and took the younger's place. Can you beat Ace? Luffy exclaimed, smiling up at his brother as he rose to his feet. Hey everyone, he greeted, bowing his head towards the crew, thanks for taking care of my brother. They were shocked by his manners, of course. He was Luffy's brother, after all, but it was a welcome quality. So why are you here, Ace? Luffy asked cheerily. Huh? The commander turned to his sibling. Didn't you get my message? Before the Straw Hat Boy could reply, another new, yet familiar, voice sounded. Nope, it answered for the captain, its owner leaping into view in much the same way Fire Fist did. The man landed on the rail and the crew gasped as they were met with a very, very familiar figure. What was it, anyways? Forget it. It doesn't matter, Ace replied casually, turning to look at the man who sat cross-legged beside him. Luffy! Nami exclaimed in surprise. Both of her captains turned to look at her with blank faces before the older grinned. Hey! He greeted, waving to the redhead cheerily. The teen turned to his other self, tilting his head as he looked him over. You're me? He asked. Yup, the Pirate King answered. There was a moment of silence as the captain processed that before he broke out into the widest of grins, laughing in that unique way he always did. That's so cool. Hey, Ace, isn't that awesome? There are two of me. The crew was speechless, to say the least. Luffy was acting like meeting an older version of his future self was an everyday occurrence. Then again, it was Luffy. He probably thought it was a mystery, as he was so prone to think when faced with something he didn't understand. Yeah, I know, Ace replied, smirking down at his younger brother. One was bad enough. Then he turned to the Pirate King curiously. Should you really be here? Wouldn't seeing them change the past? Too late, the older Luffy began, smiling sheepishly as he prepared to be reprimanded. I kind of ran into them when I was looking for you. He didn't bother to stop the swift punch to the head his brother gave him. Idiot, Ace said, eyebrow twitching. He clearly wasn't too impressed with the man. It's not my fault. The Pirate King whined defensively, pouting. Zoro thought I was the other Luffy and dragged me off. Everyone turned to the swordsman, eyeing him expectantly. What? He asked. Luffy's Luffy. Well, he had a point. Anyways, Ace started, pulling back to the original conversation. I'm here for a small task, so I figured I'd try to meet up with you. He explained, facing the younger Straw Hat. A grin split his face. Luffy, wanna come join the Whitebeard pirate crew? Your friends can come, too, of course. No way, both captains replied, identical pouts on both their faces. Ace smiled at the younger. Just thought I'd ask, he stated with a bit of a laugh, turning to the Pirate King sooner. And I didn't ask you, Lou. But you did ask me, the Pirate King stated. No, I asked the other you. But I'm still me. Fire Fist sighed, decidedly dropping the topic, knowing he wouldn't get far if he tried to explain it to the moron. Whitebeard, Usopp echoed as he thought, shock crossing his features. As much as the crew wanted to question their future captain, they were just as curious about that mystery brother who just popped out of nowhere. So the mark on your back is real. Ace's features softened, something akin to respect and fondness replacing his usual confidence. The only one who really understood that look was the Pirate King, the one who met Ace's captain and spent time with him. Whitebeard, he was a great man. Luffy owed him a lot. Letting him stay aboard his ship, his unquestioning acceptance of everything the king told him, his assistance in saving Ace, back then, when he was in the place of his younger self. He cared nothing for the guy, didn't even know who he was. Up until his arrival in the past, the old guy's name didn't mean much to him. Now, though. Yeah, Ace answered, it's my pride and joy. After 10 years, Luffy truly understood the weight those words carried. Whitebeard is the greatest pirate I've ever known, the fire user continued. I want to make him the pirate king, not you, Luffy. The pirate king interjected before his young counterpart could reply. But the rest of his words were muffled by the palm of his sibling's hand as it slapped over his mouth, preventing him from revealing his knowledge to the crew. Hush, Ace commanded. His younger self ignored him and went on as if the interruption never occurred. That's okay. I'll just fight him, he declared cheerily. Again, Ace's smile softened. That time was different from the first, the Pirate King noticed, and he was reminded of how much his big brother cared for him. A pang in his chest warned him that, if their plan didn't succeed, that was the last time the two would see each other before Marineford, the last time they would talk. There was something in his eyes that Luffy couldn't quite read. He was thinking of something during the quiet that passed within the group. Why don't you come inside? Sanji questioned. I'll make some tea. Oh no, don't worry about us. This'll only take a minute. Luffy's heart dropped when he saw his brother retrieve a folded paper from his pocket. His body went cold as he stared at that familiar piece of paper. That damned Vivre card he hated so much, beginning to panic on the inside. No. Here, the commander began as he tossed his younger brother the paper. I want to give this to you. No, please no, huh? The young captain stared blankly at the card. Always keep that with you. The Pirate King's eyes doubled in size, his mind roving over the memories, the ones that replayed over and over again whenever he closed his eyes, that he'd had to live with for the last 10 years. Don't, Ace. Please don't, not again. It's a piece of paper, the younger stated. It'll allow us to meet again. That piece of paper will let us meet again. Keep it with you, always. Wow, don't want it? No, I do. Thank you for loving me. Ace gripped his hat, turning to face his brother's crew. Having a little brother makes an older brother worry. His expression turned sympathetic. He probably gives you guys lots of trouble, too. Take care of him for me. Luffy felt like the world was crashing down around him. Those words, that sentence, he couldn't handle it, not again. What, you're leaving already? His younger self asked as his brother stood in preparation of his descent to Striker waiting below. Before Ace could answer, the Pirate King rose as well and gripped the commander's bicep, jerking him back. He saw the puzzled look his brother gave him but ignored it, looking down at the water as he tried to calm his racing heart, hide his frustration as he watched that moment in his life repeat itself, leading to the end of his last remaining brother's life. He didn't know what he was going to do, but he couldn't let go of his sibling. What is it? Ace questioned, looking down at the Pirate King with a hint of concern. We have to go. No, he shouted instinctively, shocking the crew and commander. Quickly he tried to think of something, anything, to say. Everything he was told about not changing the past was erased from his mind as he tried to keep his breaths even. My only regret is that I didn't get to see you reach your dream. But I'm sure you will. You're my little brother, after all. He swallowed, allowing his bangs to fall in his face as he stared at Striker down below. Let's stay, just for a bit. I miss my crew. Instead of protests, instead of refusal, he was met with an understanding silence. He felt his brother's arm relax and looked up, eyes gazing over the others. All right, he conceded, not botite. The look on his face told Luffy that, even without knowing, he somehow understood. Just today, we've got to get moving if we're going to catch up to Teach. Luffy nodded, turning away again, his hand still around his brother's arm. Thanks, Ace. No one questioned him, asked what was wrong. Even 10 years before, his crew understood him perfectly. They allowed whatever fears and anxieties present at the time to pass on their own because Luffy was their captain and they knew without words just how torn up he was. Whatever concerns they had went unsaid. If Luffy wanted them to know, he would tell them. Until then, they would wait. I'll never die. Words hurt, Ace. The evening put Ace's manners to good use. What with there now being 3 bottomless pits aboard the Going Merry, his brother's ship, or so he was told. He'd apologized profusely to the crew's cook, a man that went by the name Blackleg Sanji. He was a man of true talent, no doubt rivaling Thatch when. Thatch. He gritted his teeth. Damn it. Where was he? Well, that Sanji guy was about as skilled as the head chef aboard the Moby. Considering his presumed age, he was impressed. Of course, he pitied the man as well. To be caught by Luffy and made into his cook, the blonde certainly had terrible luck. How long would he survive, feeding that black hole? And now there were 2 of them. He shivered at the thought. Fire Fist, at least, knew self-restraint. Those 2, though. It was amazing everyone else got to eat. Ace smiled as he looked across the deck at his little and older brothers, currently laughing as they sat across from one another, entertained by the long-nosed one and the reindeer. With the way they were flailing about, he hadn't a clue what they were doing, but at least they were enjoying themselves. Eyes roving over the Pirate King's smile, his features hardened with concern. Luffy had been in that time for months. He'd seen a lot of the man, witnessed just how much he changed over the course of, a decade. For the most part, his sibling was the same. He was his stupid, meat-loving self, which Ace was thankful for. Even after reaching his goal and becoming the man with the most freedom, he was still his little brother. But he still changed. Ace wasn't sure if that was a good thing. As expected, he was a little more mature, insightful. That scolding he received at the restaurant was proof of that, but there was something else. He was cautious, even worried. The pirate probably thought the fire user hadn't noticed the way he panicked when Ace said they were going to leave. Maybe Luffy figured he'd hid his true intent by saying that he missed his crew. He was wrong. Even after all those years, Luffy was still as easy to read as he was throughout their childhood. Even if he was good at hiding it, his little big brother was never fooled. Something was going to happen soon, to him, or maybe to his crew. That much he knew, but to see so much fear and pain in the boy's eyes, such pleading in his tone. It was almost like he was broken, scarred worse than that mark on his chest let on. What could have done that to him? A shadow cast onto the wood of the deck beside him, contorting as he heard the distinct sound of a cigarette being lit. Leaning back against the rail, Ace released a heavy breath, keeping his gaze in front of him. Tired? Sanji questioned, shoving his lighter back into his pocket as he blew a puff of smoke. It twirled in front of his face, dancing as it dispersed and revealed the very uninterested, bored face the blonde had been wearing as of late. Ace snorted. Taking care of a little brother like him can be exhausting. He turned his smile to the cook, a sympathetic look in his eyes. Sorry if we ate all your provisions. Sanji shrugged, waving off his third apology that night. I'm used to it by now. At least you have manners. Fire Fist laughed. Lou's never been very mindful of others. I take it you're used to cleaning up his messes. After a moment of stillness, he sighed and nodded, sweeping a tired hand through his hair. He's slow, so he makes me worry. One of these days he's going to get into trouble and I'm not going to be able to bail him out. We got your back, Sanji declared, taking his cigarette between two fingers as they watched Chopper stick a set of chopsticks up his nose, causing the three around him to burst into childish giggles. We're used to dealing with the shitty captain by now. He's a pain, but we knew what we were getting into when we joined. Is that so? Ace's smile turned nostalgic. No longer was he there, on his brother's ship. No, he was in a forest, 10 years old, yelling at the obnoxious little runt crying in front of him who'd almost gotten himself killed trying to keep their secret. I wish I did. Being alone is worse than getting hurt. Out of all the time he spent with his brother over the years, that memory was one that stood out the most. You want me to live? He closed his eyes, smiling. Of course I do. Dinner must have been a nightmare for that blonde cook. The two Straw Hat captains had various snacks throughout the day consisting of meat and more meat, yet claimed they were famished once the last meal of the day rolled around. Ace could see Sanji losing his temper more frequently as time went on and couldn't help but sympathize. Everyone laughed as the counterparts stretched, two rubbery limbs landing on the same piece of meat, eyes locked as they readied themselves to steal it from the other. Why they were fighting with themselves, only they would know. Eventually the younger pulled away, immediately rushing his spoils to the black hole beneath his nose. It didn't make it, though, seeming to vanish from thin air, leaving the teen pirate to blink. All eyes turned to the Pirate King, who was happily munching on the meat as though he hadn't just stolen it. How he did it they didn't know, but far be it for anyone to question Luffy's future self. Ace was surprised to find that not one of the crew members had asked about the future. In fact, they'd asked the man nothing. Not about the scar on his chest, the absence of his hat, or whether or not they succeeded in finding One Piece. Actually, that was a lie. The long nose, Usopp, inquired about whether or not the great Captain Usopp had succeeded in conquering the seas, to which Luffy just laughed and told the man he was funny. Ace almost felt sorry for the poor bastard. Hey, Zoro, the Pirate King began, grinning at the swordsman seated at the base of the mast. Can I have some? The green-haired man raised an eyebrow after following his captain's eyes to the bottle of alcohol in his hand. Since when do you drink? Despite the question, he grabbed the neck of a second bottle placed at his side and tossed it to the rubber man, who simply smiled. The younger Luffy pouted as he watched his counterpart uncork the beverage and take his first gulp. That stuff tastes gross. He shrugged. It's not so bad, it's not as good as meat. Nothing's as good as meat, she, that's right. Despite the lax tone the two used, the atmosphere surrounding their crewmates faltered into an uncomfortable quiet. Ace couldn't blame them. He reacted much the same way when he woke up that morning months ago to find his captain and older younger brother sharing a few cups of sake. Luffy never really paid attention to that stuff, so it was a bizarre sight, but, well, he supposed it could be attributed to the fact that people change over time, along with their tastes. It wasn't that unbelievable, just weird. He didn't seem the type. Ace, the Pirate King called, bringing him from his internal rambling. Want some? He shook his head and offered a smile. Content with simply observing the people who would take care of his little brother from then on, he didn't need to drink. Ace was interested in learning a little about them. Nami, who'd retreated some time ago to take stock of all of the provisions and valuables they had aboard the ship, seemed to be the ship's navigator. She was a strong-willed woman with a peculiar interest in money and riches. She seemed to be the most shocked and cautious of her future captain, but at the same time cared deeply for him, just like the others. Zoro was the name of the one who drank and slept all day, a swordsman who used 3 weapons. There was the talking reindeer, Chopper, along with the cook Sanji and some girl named Vivi who didn't seem to fit in as well as the others. He assumed she wasn't actually a member, didn't seem the pirate type. And then, the great Captain Usopp, oh, right. Then there was the coward, or liar, or sniper, something to that effect. In all seriousness, he looked Simikagami Shanks' crew. Who is it? Well, whatever. That's so amazing, Usopp, Chopper explained as the liar finished his tall tale, eyes shining with awe and admiration. How he actually believed the long nose, Ace wasn't sure. That's so cool, came the follow-up from his own brother. Ace sighed. Well, they certainly fit well with the rubber brat. The Pirate King simply laughed, though, so maybe he'd grow to be less gullible as he got older. The red-headed navigator returned from within the ship, causing Sanji to rush to her side, spinning around like a moron and swooning over her as his calm, collected exterior evaporated before their eyes. Ace noticed throughout the day how doting the man was when it came to women. He wasn't really sure what to think of that, but, well, it was pretty funny seeing his mood change so unbelievably fast. Nami Swan, shut up, love cook. You're making too much noise, the swordsman stated as he downed the last of his bottle. Immediately the blonde turned around, a mask of irritation on his face as his voice dropped to dangerous lows. Who was that, you shitty Marimo? You heard me, and again the fights began, Zoro unsheathing his katana and Sanji raising his leg as they locked eyes and readied. Rolls of an iconic laugh split the air, carried by the wind to each of the crew members as it stretched into the night. Heads turned to a 27-year-old man whose mouth curved into an impossible grin. You guys are hilarious. Immediately the men dropped their stances, staring at the Pirate King. We weren't trying to be funny, you shitty captain. She, I know. I just missed this. Everyone smiled, just slightly, and Ace felt the tension in his shoulders evaporate into nothing. With how forced Luffy looked since they arrived on that ship, how worried he was relieved to see a real smile on his face, even if it only lasted a moment. Not being the cause of that smile felt a little sad at first. He couldn't cheer up the one so important to him, after all. He wasn't even sure what was wrong. But they were. Being with them washed Luffy's worries away, brought back his smile. It was then that Ace realized it. Luffy, he wasn't the same little kid that used to hopelessly follow him around. After so many years, he'd changed, matured. And he wasn't just talking about his future self, but the kid from that time, as well. He'd amassed a fine crew, gained a freedom of his own. You died. Taking a deep breath, he looked at the 2 counterparts as they interacted with the crew, stealing food from people's plates, getting scolded by the cook. Luffy didn't really need a big brother to watch over him anymore. He'd finally grown up a bit, didn't need protecting. But he couldn't help but worry. That was his bratty baby brother, no matter how much time passed. Being alone is worse than getting hurt. Even if I'm gone, you won't be alone. Things had settled down aboard the Going Merry. Zoro had long since fallen asleep. Chopper and Vivi retired as well. Even the younger of the Straw Hat captains was snoring away, belly filled with the copious amount of food he divulged in earlier that night. The rest sat on deck, watching the stars, filling the night with laughter. That, however, faded just like everything else. It was quiet, eerily so, and the Pirate King knew what was on everyone's minds. He could see their glances to his chest, the rigid, malformed skin of his scar, but he pretended not to notice. After a little bit of drinking, he felt his face redden. He wasn't drunk, never drunk, but he could feel the effect of the alcohol on his system. He recalled being in a similar state when he divulged a little too much to old man Whitebeard back on the Moby. Things weren't looking good, but he could only blame himself for that. It was his stupid impulsivity that led to them staying the night there in the first place. Could he really be blamed, though? Was he just supposed to sit back and watch as his past repeated, as his brother said goodbye only to be captured and executed soon after, to die in his arms? Even though I'm worthless, no, he wouldn't do it. Thank you for loving me. He couldn't, Luffy chuckled, watching as Nami lectured Usopp, telling him not to make up such outlandish stories, as though that would work. Even in his time, 10, 11 years into the future, their sniper was still a pathological liar. He wouldn't be Usopp if he wasn't. Immediately everyone turned at his laughter, silenced. I miss this, he said offhandedly, tearing another bite off the leg of meat he held. The first to react was Usopp, of course. He swallowed, allowing a few minutes to pass in silence. Are we? He allowed his voice to fall, implying his question. Of course not, Luffy replied in a bit of a shout. He couldn't help it, if he didn't have his crew. If something happened to them, he'd really be all alone. That scared him more than anything. Looking to the speechless faces of his young, so young, crew, he figured they deserved some sort of explanation. It's just, I've been in this time for months. I haven't seen you guys in a long time. As they pondered his words, he glanced at each of their faces. They were only kids, treading the most dangerous waters on that earth. Maybe he was just getting old, but he was starting to realize how much of an idiot he was back then. It was pure chance they never died. They weren't ready to face the world. If they had been, if he'd waited. No, that was in the past. But so was he. Briefly he saw Ace's knowing stare fall on him off to the side. The question was, what did he know? He was already aware that he died at some point. No thanks to Marco. Was that what that stare was about? Or Luffy, Nami called. He snapped his head from his brother to his navigator, owlish eyes blinking curiously, waiting for her to continue. That scar, her voice faded, raising her index finger to his chest. He was afraid of that. With Ace there he couldn't say it, shouldn't say it, but he was such a horrible liar and they knew him so well. Even back then when they first began traveling together. They would be able to tell if he didn't tell the truth. But he told the old man that he wouldn't say anything. Why is this so frustrating? Just say something. What scar? Immediately his crew deflated, a group sighed chorusing across the deck. Really? Nami asked. That's the best you could come up with? She sorry, he said, scratching the back of his head. But you guys can't know about this yet, alright? It's a secret. He expected retaliation, instead met with submissive acceptance. Looking at all of their faces, he noted their concern. It was nice, seeing them worry about him, and he felt kind of bad about not being able to tell them, but he wasn't really sure what he could and couldn't share. The Pirate King knew he couldn't interfere in any battles, but as far as information went, he hadn't a clue what was considered safe. Not that he hadn't already divulged a lot without worrying of the consequences. So, Sanji began from his place leaning against the mast, taking a long drag of his cigarette. How'd you end up here? You can tell us that, can't you? Luffy folded his arms and furrowed his brow, deep contemplation washing over his features. I think that's okay, since it's not a spoiler, but I don't know how I got here. You don't know? Usopp echoed quizzically. He gave a curt nod. See, there was this guy the first was fighting. He was so annoying, going on about how I should give up, or else, said something like, you'll never be able to withstand my power. Or something. Then there were all these explosions and fire and he thought it'd get to me but Nami used her klima. Immediately he slapped his hand over his mouth before he could divulge too much, glancing at each of his crew members' faces. They were all curious, naturally, but didn't ask. He was thankful for that. So he used this devil fruit ability and then it was all buzz and woof. And then bam, crash. The hell was that? When I got up, I was on the giant Asen ship in the New World. They all stared dumbly at him, as though he had 3 heads. No one even blinked as Ace walked over and slammed a fist into his older younger brother's head, earning a short yelp. The Pirate King looked at him with a pout, receiving an even glare. Have a little more respect. He's still the strongest man in the world, you know. But Ace, he's huge, Fire Fist sighed, rubbing soothing circles on his temple. That's not the problem, Lou. Same old Luffy, Usopp stated, a small chuckle passing his lips. The twilight hours grew late, finding only the Pirate King and his siblings still on deck. The Straw Hat crew had retired some hours ago, leaving the duo to stare out at the dark ocean before them, the golden sands of Alabasta to their right. Last time Luffy was there, he'd already begun traversing the desert. By the time his first day there came to a close and the frigid Alabasta night began, his crew had situated themselves somewhere in the harsh desert sands, camping under the stars and huddling together for warmth. Knowing that, how could he not worry about what had changed? They were a day behind schedule, was that bad? Despite that, he didn't regret his decision, asking his brother to stay the night. Maybe now he wouldn't meet Blackbeard. Maybe now he would live. It might have been selfish of him to jeopardize the past just so his younger self could be granted one more day with his big brother, but he didn't care. Regardless of the consequences, he was content with his decision. We have to leave in the morning, you know, Ace stated from next to him on Mary's figurehead, leaning back to look at the stars. Luffy didn't look at him, focusing his gaze on the limitless darkness of the midnight waters, a sight he'd become well acquainted with over the years. I know. When his brother made no move to continue, he added, it was nice to see Mary again. Ace raised an eyebrow and turned to him, watching as he ran his palm along the surface of the figurehead. The ship? He questioned. He affirmed with a nod. It's been a long time since I saw her. The fire user's face dropped and he lowered himself, lying back against the hard surface of his ship. So something happens, he stated. The Pirate King didn't answer. Is that why you wanted to stay? Maybe that was part of it. Seeing the Going Merry after so many years was nostalgic. He loved that ship, just as he loved the Thousand Sunny, and he would always remember it. The sacrifices it made to keep them adrift. The image of it burning before him against a black sky, watching it slip into the murky depths below through tear-stained eyes, would remain with him for the rest of his life. He was indebted to that ship, always would be. Mary wasn't the only sacrifice he witnessed throughout his journey, though.
There had been so many other their lives over the years. It started with Sabo, the celestial dragons shooting down his ship, killing him without reason. But it didn't end there. Everywhere he went he saw the end of the life, it seemed. At least, as he got older he did. Back then, though, before Marineford, life seemed so simple. They were just sailing the waters on an innocent adventure, exploring the different lands they came across and helping those they met along the way.
Then the war came. Don't you want to go home? The words slipped from his mouth faster than he could stop them. Ace hadn't been paying much attention and turned curiously to stare at him, arms folded behind his head. Well, he already said it. Couldn't go back, could he? Luffy figured that he might as well voice his opinions. Don't you want to see the crew again? Well, yeah, but then why not go back? You just up and left. They're worried about you. Slowly the commander sat up, narrowed eyes on his brother. I already told you, I'm not going back. But, Luffy, he called dangerously, halting the Pirate King's words in an instant. Teach needs to pay for what he's done. He furrowed his brow. After so many years, he'd almost forgotten how stubborn Ace could be. Not that he was really any better, but still, Thatch. Thatch would want to be avenged. No he doesn't, he wants you to come back, alive. Despite his internal protests, he was thankful Ace stopped him. He almost told him that the 4th Division commander was alive. That would have been a big mistake and he was sure Marco and the other Whitebeard pirates wouldn't be too happy to hear he almost let it slip. The brothers glared at each other for a short while before childishly turning away, crossing their arms as they sulked. Luffy couldn't stay mad for long, though. How could he be upset with his dead brother? Off on the horizon he spotted flecks of light. Soon the twilight would give way to the morn and the world would wake once more. The crew would rise, along with his other self, and they would leave to begin their journey to find Blackbeard. He felt restless knowing that, should he fail, that night would be the last his counterpart saw of his brother before he died. When morning came and they went their separate ways, when his crew left to traverse the desert, something would end. Something would break. And he hated knowing that there was nothing he could do to stop it. A bitter image of a day many years ago crossed his mind, the paper that he hated being placed in his grasp, unfolding it to see nothing but a name he knew so well. Ace, he called, voice barely above a whisper. What is it, Lou? He asked, having returned to lying on his back, disinterested tone meeting his ears. Luffy looked to see the freckled youth had closed his eyes. He looked so young, too young. Ace should have been older, wiser. He should have years beyond the Pirate King, experience far greater than his own, but he was stuck at the beginning, unable to move forward. Come Marineford, everything would end. I wish you never gave me your Vivre card. During his short, bittersweet stay aboard his young self's vessel, the Pirate King had noticed that something was off. He wasn't sure what it was, but something about the teenage Straw Hat Captain didn't sit well with him. Keeping that in mind, he observed the boy periodically throughout the whole of yesterday, unable to come to a conclusion. That changed come morning. Luffy was anxious, fidgeting in place as he stole glances at his older sibling. The more the Pirate King saw of him, the more he thought that it wasn't right. When he said goodbye to his brother all those years ago, he'd been sad but also excited for the chance to meet again. He relished in the thought of meeting on the battlefield, settling their rivalry once and for all, having that final fight that would determine who was fit to be Pirate King. Even if Ace had said that his goal was to making the giant Asen Pirate King. After getting to know Whitebeard on such a close level since his arrival, he could tell that the old man didn't want that position. In fact, he wanted Ace to take it. The young Luffy there was foreign, holding none of that excitement, almost like he knew. The king stayed beside his sibling, sitting on the railing with his legs crossed, trying not to intrude on their goodbyes. He noticed Nami looking at him though. Nervous. They'd talked in the morning before everyone woke. Maybe he shouldn't have said anything, but he didn't care. He wasn't going to watch as things repeated themselves. Perhaps that would change it.
Ace crouched beside him, ready to jump down to strike her as soon as they were ready to part. He looked over the pirates one last time, grinned firmly in place. A hand reached to hold his hat in place as he prepared his descent. I'm leaving him in your care, he stated.
The crew nodded. Then the commander turned to his young sibling, his features softening. Even if he's a pest, he's still my irreplaceable little brother. I'm trusting you to keep him safe for me. He hooked his right arm around the Pirate King's neck, pulling him close. The man blinked up at him curiously. Guess I shouldn't worry since this guy's here, but I can't help it. He does seem to attract trouble, Vivi noted, smiling. Ace snorted. That's an understatement. With that, he let the pirate go and rose to his feet. Well, till next tea. Join my crew, the young captain shouted. All eyes turned to him. Both Ace and the Pirate King stared blankly, taken off guard by the request as the boy approached. Don't leave. Stay here. You can be part of my crew. Bam! Within seconds Luffy was babying his throbbing head, Ace reprimanding him with words like, "I told you, I'm not working under you," and "Oyaji's my only captain." "I'm rubber, so why does it hurt?" the teen whined, not for the first time in his life. Watching his brother scold his younger self, the Pirate King narrowed his eyes. That wasn't right. He couldn't recall whether or not he tried to recruit Ace when they met in Alabasta, but if he did he hadn't done so that desperately. It was like he was trying whatever he could to make him stay. It was like, "Moron," Ace chastised. "It's not like we're never going to see each other again." The Pirate King's eyes widened. What did he know? He never had a chance to ask. Before he could react properly, the fire user gave a lazy wave. "See ya." Ace stepped back, allowing his body to plunge downward, landing in the tiny vessel beside Mary. Luffy looked back at his past self and bit his lip. He wanted to ask. He wanted to ask so badly, but there wasn't any time. Stupid Ace, he just had to rush, didn't he? Forcing a grin, he waved. "Bye," he shouted as he jumped off the edge. 10 minutes later Mary was out of sight but not out of mind. The brothers remained quiet. Glancing at Ace, he pouted. The commander hadn't so much as looked at him. He was doing that thing where his face scrunched up. To Luffy it looked like he was constipated. Maybe he realized the abnormality in his younger self's actions, as well. "Hey," Ace's voice cut through his thoughts. For just a brief instant they locked gazes. "What did you tell him?" The pirate blinked, tilting his head. "What?" Again the commander glanced his way, failing to keep his eyes on the waters ahead. "You told Luffy something, right? About me," he added. "What was it?" He returned his brother's unflinching stare. "I didn't tell him anything. I'm not stupid, Ace." Ace didn't seem convinced. "Not that stupid," he corrected. "Then why did he look so scared?" Luffy couldn't answer that. The freckled youth sighed, tipping his hat over his eyes to shield them from the sun's harsh glare. "What happens to me, Lou?" I know Oyaji told you not to tell me," he explained, "but does it really matter? I already know I'm going to die. Marco said so, he doesn't lie." "Damn it, Ace." When his younger brother remained silent, he pressed further. "You regret taking my Vivre card. Does it happen soon?" Biting his lip, the Pirate King averted his gaze. He wanted to tell him. He wanted to explain what happened. Try to get him to change his mind about Teach. But what if the old man was right? What if he did that and it changed too much? What if he made things worse? But would it really be that bad? Thatch sighed, watching as a messenger from Akagami's crew stood as the center of attention, his form overshadowed by Oyaji's much larger build. He almost felt sorry for the poor sap. It must have been pretty daunting, faced with such an intimidating man for the first time, especially if he was new to Shanks's crew. What was his name? Rockstar. Yeah, it was something stupid like that. "Say, Marco," he called to the blonde sitting casually on the inner rail. Why not send me after Ace?" he asked, leaning on the wood of the ship, eyes never leaving the pirate as he spoke for the Yonko not currently present. "He thinks you're dead, Yoi." "Exactly, if he sees me then." Marco held up a hand, stopping his fellow commander's train of thought. When he saw his brother clam up, he turned back to the middle of the deck. "We don't want to change anything, Yoi. Not yet. If we're going to do this, we have to be careful." Thatch groaned, conceding to the first mate's logic. "Better to be safe, then." The pirate turned to them then, grinning. Thatch raised an eyebrow, an amused smile on his face. "Oi, you there?" he shouted. "You've heard the name Rockstar before, right?" Marco folded his arms, his half-lidded eyes roving over the stranger. "Doesn't sound familiar," he stated. The 4th Division commander couldn't help but laugh as Rockstar's face went blank, speechless. "Sorry, buddy, never heard of you." Before the pirate had a chance to speak, his eyes caught on the letter he delivered as it was shredded carelessly by the captain. He shouted in alarm, the pieces fluttering helplessly to the ground. "Wait, what are you?" Whitebeard's voice boomed through the open air. "He sends me a damn letter," the Yonko said with clear annoyance in his tone. "Since when did that boy get to be so important?" Thatch did his best to hold in pitying laughter as he watched the red-hair pirate crumble to the ground, catching the last piece of the letter as it fell. Rockstar himself wasn't so amused, clenching his fist. "Hey, just hold on." The redhead leaned towards his older brother, the curve of his lips still holding amusement. "He's pretty brave, standing up to the old man." "Or stupid," the blonde noted. "Yeah, that was equally possible."
Boss said that letter was important. Rockstar shouted, a bit panicked. This is Akagami we're talking about. Do you know what you're doing?"
Thatch snickered. "Of course he does. I'm Whitebeard," Oyaji stated firmly, his voice carrying across the deck as his sons and daughters watched the scene play out. He took a swig from his bottle, much to the dismay of his nurses. One approached, a new girl. Thatch hadn't learned her name yet. It must have been frustrating for her to watch. Knowing the old man's health, she placed a hand on his fapton. "You've had enough alcohol." As usual, her pleas went unheard, Oyaji stating that he could drink whenever he pleased, that it wouldn't kill him. Boss said that letter was urgent. Rockstar continued, standing to face the captain with furrowed brows and a firm frown. Whitebeard's expression remained unchanged as he returned his attention to the pirate, narrow eyes watching him as he spoke. I can guess what it said. It was about Ace and Blackbeard. Suddenly the air turned stale. Thatch looked around at his siblings, feeling their tension. Very few had been told about Luffy's warnings, but all felt resentment for the bastard. He betrayed them, tried to kill his own comrade. All those years he sailed with them, abandoned as soon as he got what he wanted. You tell that red-haired little brat that if he wants to talk to me he'd better bring some good drink and come himself. Rockstar was speechless. If you understand, leave. Oyaji certainly wasn't messing around. They'd all been on edge since Ace and Luffy left, helpless to do anything for them. They could only wait. Thatch hated it the most, knowing that they were gone because of him. Had the brothers reunited yet? Once more he looked to Marco, those lazy eyes looking like they were going to slip shut any minute. He may have looked and acted calm, but he was just as worried as the rest of them. He hadn't been sleeping much. Which brought him to another question. How much do you know? He waited for the first mate to meet his stare, silently pressing him to continue. Thatch threw his arms behind his head, leaning back against the rail. I was supposed to die, same with Ace, but what else did the kid tell you? Can't say Yoi. Ah, come on, this involves me, too, you know. Marco's eyes narrowed, something in them he didn't quite understand. Suddenly he wanted to shrink back, like he'd said something wrong. It involves Ace, too. It involves all of us, Yoi. That doesn't mean we have a right to know. The cook swallowed, nodding slowly. Satisfied, the Phoenix turned to watch as Rockstar hesitantly left the ship. Trust Oyaji, he knows what he's doing. How could he argue with that? Their long, awkward silence continued. Patience wearing thin, Ace sat up straight, looking directly into his brother's eyes. Lou, I need you to tell me. The Pirate King turned away. How could he say that? Only months from then, his brother would die for him. But how could he get out of answering? He had nowhere to run. Stryker was barely big enough to seat them both. Besides, he was the Pirate King. He couldn't let something like that get to him. Glancing back at the commander, he took in his features. Dark, gray eyes met his. He was brave. He was willing to face the truth, to find out how his life would end. And should he know, he would accept it. Luffy knew that. That was just the kind of person Ace was. He would never back down. Even in the face of death. Ace had so many freckles. One time, when Luffy was 12, he couldn't sleep. It was the anniversary of Sabo's death. It always got to him. Ace lay next to him, sound asleep. He remembered counting his freckles to pass the time. 27. There were probably more now. Time changes even the most mundane of things. He couldn't stall for much longer and Ace wasn't giving him much of a choice. His mouth felt dry, parched as he took a deep, shivering breath. Next time, he mumbled, barely audible amongst the ocean waves. Again, he took a breath, hanging his head. Next time I see you, you die. The air was thick. Luffy dared to peek up, noticing the enlargement of his siblings' eyes before they once more settled. He closed his, not wanting to see the pirate's reaction. Soon he felt a hand on his head, ruffling his hair into a matted mess. Looking past his lids, he stared stupidly at his brother. He was smiling. Thanks, Luffy. But it's not like I can live forever, he stated as he tipped his head back, looking to the clear skies. His hat slipped, falling to rest on his shoulders. And I don't need to. Making it to see tomorrow is enough for me. Luffy continued to stare. He accepted it, just like that. My only regret, I just wish, is that I didn't get to see you reach your dream. That you weren't there to see it. The Pirate King's eyes widened. What? Ace's head fell forward, his smile showing sympathy. You have to see me die, right? Sorry. But I'm sure you will. You're my little brother, after all. Ace, shit. He didn't know where he was or why he was there, but fuck if he cared. There was a searing pain in his chest, leaving him in disrepair as he curled unto himself. What he was doing before then was a mystery, mind fuddled by the hurt that spread from that spot in the center of his chest. He could feel his flames soaring to life as the mess of a pirate tried to return from the disarray his thoughts had fallen to.
It was a while before he realized that his eyes were closed, but he wasn't sure he wanted to open them. As isolated as the darkness made him feel, it also gave him a sense of false security. With it, he didn't have to think. But he knew it wasn't for the best, that he had to get moving. Whatever he was doing before he went to sleep was important. He couldn't just continue on, blissfully unaware. He had to remember and then he could decide what to do next. Fluttering eyelids warned of the brightness of the room. He winced, reluctant to attempt another try at waking, but his internal battle was short and soon he was staring at a wooden ceiling. The scent of the sea wafted his nose, mixing with the smell of the wood. As he laid there he allowed the swaying to send his thoughts adrift. He was on a ship, no doubt, but it wasn't the Moby. Another wave of pain surged through his torso and he gripped his chest, shocked when fingers met unmarred skin. He blinked, wondering why he wasn't wounded. It felt like he should be, at least a little.
Where was the pain coming from? Why did he expect to find a hole where there was flesh? Taking a deep breath, he tried to concentrate his thoughts, focus on the memories from before he woke up. He remembered something, a pale sky, hordes of people gathered beneath it, fighting. That's right, he was to be executed. Oyaji, he. Ace, I've come to save you. The pirate clenched his jaw as a jabbing pain shot through his skull. Luffy was there. That damned, stupid little brother tried to save him. He looked so beaten and battered by the time he got to the platform. The stand his big brother was deemed his deathbed. The boy should have died twice over with how hurt he was, yet still, that smile. Pulling his hand to shield his eyes, he let out a few deep, shuddering breaths. They all wanted to save him. His friends were dying right before his very eyes, yet he couldn't help but cry tears of joy, knowing how much he meant to them, that they would go to such lengths to save someone as worthless as the son of the Pirate King. And then, he froze, recalling that last piece of memory. Hadn't he died? Akainu took a shot for Luffy and the pirate acted on instinct, taking the blow in his brother's stead. He felt a fist of magma tear through his back, destroying Oyaji's mark as it tore through his insides, coming clean through his chest. When the admiral retracted his limb, he fell into his sibling's arms. As he took his last few breaths, he thanked his family, thanked them for loving him, even though his life was worthless. Because that was the happiest he'd ever been. Bolting upright, he patted his chest, searching for some remnant of the war. No sign remained. Unscarred and uninjured, it was like the happenings of Marineford were all mere figments of his fevered mind. But he couldn't have imagined that. He just couldn't have. So then, was he dead? Was that the afterlife? It seemed pretty dingy for a supposed paradise. Not that he was really one to believe in heaven or hell. There's a thought, maybe it was hell. For being a place where he was to be eternally tortured, it was pretty cozy. How you feelin'? The pirate turned towards the unfamiliar sound, met with a broad grin. At first his mind flashed to Luffy, but quickly he dismissed the image in favor of the unknown boy seated beside the bed. Beneath his hat, one that held an uncanny resemblance to his brother's, was a mess of red hair, framing the carefree look held on his tanned face. Where had he seen him before? Where am I? He asked, ignoring the question. The boy didn't seem to mind, though, as he just allowed his words to fall unnoticed, opting to respond instead. Our ship, he answered simply. We found you adrift a few hours ago and Captain had us pull you up. Adrift? Why was he in the water? Last he remembered, he was taking his final breaths at Marineford, saying goodbye to Oyaji, his crew and Luffy. How would he have gone from there to being picked up by a random pirate ship? Actually, it was better not to question it. He had enough of a headache as it was. Slouching as he accepted what the teen said, he allowed a small smirk to pass his lips. I see, and to whom do I owe my rescue? The boy opened his mouth in reply but was interrupted by a knock at the door. Both occupants turned to watch as the slab of wood creaked open, revealing a blond man with a scar on his eye. He had a lax air about him, calming in a way. Ace was assured by what he saw of the crew so far. They didn't seem so bad, so it was unlikely they had some ulterior motive for saving him. Why they would save the son of the Pirate King was beyond him, though. After the worldwide declaration Sengoku made about his lineage, everyone knew. He would remain wary for the time. You're awake, he stated, a relaxed smile passing over his lips. Yes, the pirate replied, bowing his head politely, thank you for saving me. Not at all, the man said, waving his manners aside as though the rescue was just an everyday thing for the crew. Maybe it was. People got thrown off the Moby quite often, so it was possible that other crews experienced the same. So, what's your name? The youth blinked. You don't? He stopped himself before he could continue the question. They didn't know? So they didn't recognize him from the broadcast? Maybe there were some people still out of the loop, he supposed. It was recent news, only a day old, so it must have needed more time to circulate. He was thankful for that. If they knew, what would they have said? No, never mind, it's Ace. Ace, then. Shutting the door behind him, the blonde moved to lean against the wall, arms folded leisurely over one another. Where are you from? Ace blinked, not entirely sure how to answer that. Did he want his home sea or his crew? And why didn't he give his name? When asking for someone's identity, don't you normally state your own? You're a pirate, right? The man asked when he realized he wasn't getting an answer, eliciting a nod from the other. What crew do you belong to? I've never heard of you before, the red-headed boy stated offhandedly as he waited for a reply. Whitebeard pirates, he said simply. Normally when he mentioned Oyaji's name he'd be met with shock, terror and then treated with the utmost care. That was in response to the weight that name carried, being identified as the world's strongest, and the knowledge that Whitebeard would overturn the sea if any harm came to one of his men. Instead, there was laughter. He raised his eyebrows and blinked at the two very amused pirates. That reaction was pretty original, he admitted. So you're one of Newgate's boys? The blonde questioned, though it was obviously rhetorical. We'll be running into them sooner or later, always do. You can reunite with them then. Always, but wait, that wasn't true. Forgetting that he wasn't sure what ship he was on exactly, he knew he never saw those two before. If they regularly crossed paths with the Moby, he would have known them. Wait. That kid did seem kind of familiar. Turning from the resting pirate to the redhead, the blonde pushed off the wall and turned for the door. Shanks, it's about time for you to return to your duties. Ace's face turned a pallid white. What did he just call him? Alright, the boy responded, hopping off his chair and following suit. As they both exited the room, Ace's mind filled with an insurmountable amount of questions. Shanks, that wasn't Shanks. No, couldn't be. Did he have a kid or something? The man was pretty laid back. It was possible, right just before he heard the latch click. Something else met his ears, loud and booming, full of excitement. Ah, really? That voice, there was something about it that knotted his stomach into an uneasy mess. But ignoring that, he focused on the name. Really? He knew that name. While he never met the man in person, he was well aware of the Pirate King's first mate, Silver's. Really? The one who responded to that name was the blonde, though, far too young to be the same person, unless... No, that was impossible. Ridiculous, even, he couldn't be, he wasn't, but... Really? Shanks? Going with that flow, Ace tore the sheets from his legs and jumped out of bed, bolting straight for the door. He flung it open and stared wide-eyed at the sight that befell him. There were a large amount of pirates, each going about their day as usual, none paying him any attention, but the bold red captain's jacket worn by one caught his eye. The man's back was facing him as he chatted with the blonde from before, a captain's hat atop his head. Turning from the bold figure before him, he gawked at the crimson sails above, met with the stark white image of the most iconic Jolly Roger in the world. Swallowing, he once more faced the man clad in red, eyes wide and disbelieving. It made no sense. It shouldn't have happened. He was supposed to be dead. So was Ace. He was supposed to have died, too, saving his brother from having a fist of magma shoved through his chest. So why, exactly, did he now find himself on the Oro Jackson with a crew that should no longer exist? Ace, called the boy's voice from earlier, though it went unheard. The youth clenched his fists. It had to be a dream, a hallucination, something else. The wood he was standing on, the people he was with, they vanished over 20 years ago. The crew disbanded, the ship retired and the captain was executed. So why was he seeing what he was? A loud, booming laughter brought him away from his silent breakdown to look once more at the jacketed figure of the captain. He pulled his mouth into a taut line, brows furrowed. Is that so? The man asked, laughing once more before he turned around, his eyes meeting Ace's without waver. So you're finally awake, boy. Fire Fist felt his heart sink as he stared into those dark eyes that he would never admit reminded him of himself, looking over his wide grin and dark hair at the man who he despised more than anything else, whose lineage he was ashamed to be a part of. Fuck, he muttered, face downturned as the captain approached, talking to Rayleigh all the while. At that point, Ace passed his stage of disbelief and was fast approaching anger. The suppressed emotions he buried away after becoming a commander of the Whitebeard pirates were bubbling to the surface. His childhood memories clogged conscious thought as he recalled the venomous words that spewed from the mouths of anyone who heard the Pirate King's name. Now, that very same man was standing before him, inching closer as each second ticked by. He couldn't believe his rotten luck. Well, began that deep voice, who do we have here? When Ace looked to him once more, it was to glare his hardest. Both Rayleigh and his captain were unaffected by it, though Shanks, who was now beside the Whitebeard commander, grew confused. You damn, dirty bastard. The muffled voices surrounding them quieted, all eyes turning to their leader and the one across from him. Ace let out a jaded, broken chuckle. Fate hated him. Instead of dying, he was facing the most famous pirate in the world. Wringing a hand to press against his forehead, he heaved a breath of exhaustion. I don't know how the hell this is happening and I don't care, he stated. But you and I, we're going to stay far away from each other. You're going to drop me off on Oyaji's ship and we're never going to see each other again. He was doing his best to stay calm, he really was. In reality, he wouldn't have minded attacking the man, giving him a good punch to the face. But after Marineford, after Teach, he knew better than to let his anger and pride sway him into such an unfavorable situation. And, as much as he hated Gold Roger, he missed his family more. The crew was clearly shocked by the tone Ace took with the man. He was the Pirate King, after all. Or was he? Had he obtained that title yet? Either way, it was probably a big insult to many, but no one said anything. And then he laughed. That bastard actually laughed away the heavy atmosphere. It was infuriating. When someone came aboard your ship and ordered you around, weren't you supposed to stand up for yourself and prove a point? The only one stupid enough to brush it off like that was Luff. Oh god. He did not just compare his little brother to that man. Nope, never happened. Alright, then, the man bellowed after his laughter settled. Did he just comply with Ace's demands? He was pulled away from his wondering when the Pirate King, completely ignoring what he just said, patted him on the back. You're Newgate's boy, we'll hand you over when we run into him. Shouldn't be long now, he said, grinning. Ace took a deep breath to keep his hot-headed nature in check. Before their journey was through, he was sure he'd kill the man, intentionally or not. His tolerance ran thin and he slapped the captain's hand away. "Don't touch me," he spat, turning to enter the room he just came from. There was no way he could remain on deck with him. "Boy," Roger called once more, eliciting a pause and glare from the youth. "What's your name?" The freckled youth clenched his fists as he recalled what Sengoku called him at his execution. "Gold D. Ace. That wasn't his name, he wasn't that man's son." "Portgas D. Ace," he answered after a long stretch, slamming the door behind him immediately after. The crew returned to their duties and Rayleigh faced his captain, noting the contemplative look and slight smile gracing his lips. "What is it, Roger?" The captain chuckled, scratching his head. "Forget it, it's nothing." Ace had to admit that staring at the ceiling could amuse him for only so long. He'd been in that room with nothing to do for all of 20 minutes before his patience ran thin. Were it not for the bastard strolling about the deck, he wouldn't have trapped himself in there. As it stood, his only choices were remaining in solitude or giving in and accompanying the Pirate King, and he was not willing to do that. So he was left in silent contemplation. At first he thought it best to try to figure out what was going on. Somehow he ended up in the past, but that really didn't seem possible. He should have been dead. Maybe he was dead. Maybe that was hell. It certainly made sense, what with being trapped in the presence of Gold Roger. That was definitely suitable as some sort of punishment. But somehow he thought it unlikely. He didn't really believe in the afterlife, anyways. So, he was in the past, then. But how? Why? Groaning, he rolled onto his side, opting to stare at the wall. It was just as unentertaining as the ceiling, but it wasn't like there was much else to look at. Thinking about how he ended up in that situation led to inconclusive answers and a splitting headache. For whatever reason, he was in the past. He accepted that, begrudgingly. Then, would he even be able to return to Oyaji's ship? He hadn't joined yet. Hell, he wasn't even born. Would the old man allow him to come aboard? A knocking brought a halt to his downward spiraling thoughts. Once more he turned over, lifting his torso from the cushion beneath him as he glanced at the door. Met with red hair, he regarded the child with curiosity. That really was Shanks, then. And the hat he wore, one day it would be Luffy's. Damn, did he ever miss that brat? Pushing himself up fully, he motioned for the kid to speak. "Captain said to come get you," he explained. "Dinner's ready." The fire user swept a tired hand across his face, wondering what to do about his little predicament. Oh, how he wanted to wring the old man's neck. Going to the mess hall wasn't a party, but he was getting hungry. Then again, he was always hungry, having a stomach almost as bottomless as his little brother's. Damn it all. Shanks blinked. "What's wrong?" I'm not hungry, kid." "Tell the captain that." He tried to hide his mocking tone, the disdain he held for the bastard all his life, but it still managed to seep through his words. Hearing the clear reluctance in Ace's voice, the boy's face sagged and he plopped down on the chair. Same one as before, giving him a knowing look. It was unnerving. That expression reminded Fire Fist of how poorly he hid his emotions. Finally, he sighed. "You don't like Captain Roger?" "Not at all," came the quick reply. "Why not? He's the pie." Cutting himself off, the pirate furrowed his brow. Was he the Pirate King yet? It's complicated, alright? The redhead shared a pout, clearly unsatisfied with the answer, resembling a young Luffy. It was eerie how similar the two could appear. After a long stretch of silence, the boy spoke up again. "A lot of people don't like the captain, but I'm not sure why." A snicker passed Ace's lips. He tried to suppress it, to no avail. "He's not a very good person, kid." "Yes, he is," Shanks retorted, voice more serious than earlier. With all the resolve carried in those dark eyes, Ace was almost inclined to believe it. The boy had complete trust in his captain. "He's amazing," he stated, something akin to admiration in his tone. "He's really nice. And strong. No one can beat him, not even the Golden Lion." Ace raised an eyebrow. Vaguely, he recalled hearing about the fight between the Pirate King and Shiki, a former power, but brushed it aside. Shanks sure held his captain in high regard. "You look up to him?" The grin on the youth's face almost rivaled Luffy's. "I want to be just like him someday. I'm gonna be the Pirate King." The smallest hint of a smile crossed his face, though he remained completely unaware. Still, he hated the bastard and didn't want anything to do with him. It didn't matter what the kid said. "So come on," Shanks urged, grabbing the pirate's hand and tugging it. "Everything's going to be gone if you keep sitting around here." "I'm not." A loud protest from his stomach had him swallowing his words, turning away with a light blush. At first the redhead just continued to blink at him in silence. Then, peals of laughter rolled from his throat, causing the fire user's embarrassment to grow. Guess he couldn't use that excuse, could he? Dinner on the Oro Jackson was all too reminiscent of the Moby. There was laughing and cheering, resembling the meaningless celebrations the Whitebeard pirates were known for. Maybe that was why Ace didn't feel out of place. Walking through the door, across the room, giving sideways glances to hardy men as he passed, it felt natural. He hated it. Sitting at the captain's table was downright torture. Apparently it was the only place with enough room left to accommodate him, but seeing as Shanks was the one who said it, he doubted it to be true. Something told him that the boy wanted him to change his opinion of the Pirate King before his stay came to an end. He was in for a heavy disappointment if that was the case. After living so many years under that man's shadow, hearing rolls of laughter whenever he inquired about Gold Roger having a son, he would never think differently. Placed directly across from the captain, Ace decidedly stared at the table. He didn't want to look at the man, didn't want to talk to him. He just wanted to fill his stomach. If he managed to ignore the bastard's existence long enough, his meal wouldn't be soiled. Still, with how booming a voice he had, it was hard to keep from glancing his way. Something about the carefree way he spoke drew in attention. Stabbing into the meat on his plate, Ace ripped off a bite angrily and chewed, frustrated that the most notable voice in the room was the one coming from directly in front of him. Eating seemed to quell his nerves for but a moment. "Boy," Roger sounded, earning a steely glare from the other, "when did you join Old Newgate?" Ace wanted to reply eloquently, something along the lines of, "Shove it, you sack of human filth," but found that it wouldn't really be appropriate. The question was innocent enough, and he liked talking about his crew, so. 2 years ago, he replied hesitantly, looking back to his plate to continue his meal. "That's so?" the captain questioned rhetorically, amusement clear in his tone. "I haven't seen you around before." Ace choked, downing a glass of water to dislodge the meat stuck in his throat. Well, he wasn't expecting that particular remark. Admitting to being from the future probably wasn't the best idea. Lying, Ace was a terrible liar. Not as bad as Luffy, but still not very believable. So, he opened his mouth in preparation of an excuse. And Roger laughed. He really didn't understand the man. "Got any family?" The commander remained quiet, wondering why the bastard saved him from replying to that last remark, before considering his question. "A brother, Luffy." "Luffy, the Pirate King echoed, grinning as he regarded the name. "He a good kid?" Ace sighed, thinking back to all the stunts his brother pulled as a kid. "He's always getting into trouble and I had to bail him out. I mean I even d." His eyes widened at the realization, halting his words. He was dead. He would never see Luffy again, never see him fulfill his dream. The table fell silent, watching as Ace's downturned face contorted, flashing briefly with anger before settling on content. He was dead but Luffy wasn't. "What's wrong?" Shanks asked from beside the fire user, quickly met with a look from Rayleigh that urged him not to ask. Ace took a deep breath. The things he says and does are crazy and he's too stupid to think things through, but he risked his life for me. To save me. He's my precious little brother. He failed to notice the calm smile that washed over the captain's face. "You two seem close."
The commander sheepishly scratched his head. Well, and then he turned pale. He just held a conversation with the damned Pirate King, the bane of his existence. That wasn't happening, it couldn't be. There was no way he was going to go along with that bastard. He may have held back on attacking him, but there was no way he was going to get along with him after the hell he lived through during his childhood. Having finished his plate, he stood abruptly from his chair, glared his hardest at the man before him, and stormed out of the room. His stomach was only partially full and Shanks was protesting his leave, but hell if he cared. Asking about Luffy to gain his favor, that was a cheap shot. The hours faded to twilight, finding the crew aboard the Oro Jackson drifting into slumber, leaving but one man to sit about the crow's nest for the nightly watch. Most would be content with lying in their beds, seeing that as a chance to rest after the day's labors. Ace was different. He saw it as an opportunity to free himself from the confines of his room, to roam about freely without the looming threat of encountering a certain someone. Swinging open the slab of wood that separated him from the deck, the pirate inhaled deeply, filling his lungs with the sea-sprayed air he'd come to know so well. Once more he could hear the waves roll against the ship's hull, crashing rhythmically as the vessel carried them through the waters. The sound made him feel safe, secure, told him that there was nothing to fear. Soon his face fell, dropping into a familiar scowl as his mind began to wander. He really needed to figure out what to do from that point on. If Oyaji refused to take him in, what could he do? A recent memory flashed through his head. Amidst the fire and carnage brought forth by his flames stood a man, tall and proud against the red backdrop of the battlefield. Strong, unyielding, he ignored the injuries scattered about his person, golden eyes meeting gray. Hard glare turning soft, he regarded Ace fondly, ignite permeating the open air. Was I a good father? Ace's lip quivered, eyes wavering as his father's last smile flashed through his mind. The one thanking him even though he deserved all the gratitude the fire user could offer. Oyaji gave him a family, a place to belong. How could he ever repay him for that? What hurt most was knowing that if he returned to his time, Whitebeard wouldn't be there. Oyaji chose Marineford as his deathbed. He'd known that. That's why he said goodbye. He really wanted to see the old guy. Ace called a deep, lax voice. Fire Fist tore his eyes away from the darkened sea, his mind from reminiscence, and looked up at the crow's nest. He was met with the laid-back smile of a notorious blonde.
Getting some fresh air? Yeah, he answered, eyeing the man. Ace wasn't sure what to make of Rayleigh. The man himself wasn't hard to get along with. Didn't bring out the fire user's bad side. But at the same time, he was Roger's first mate. That alone was proof that he wouldn't make very desirable company. The man laughed from his perch, removing a gray flask from his side, opening it to take a swig of its contents. Understandable, he remarked. You've been locked up in there all day. Yeah, well, thank your bastard captain for that, he mumbled, unsure of whether the other heard him. Again, Rayleigh chuckled. What was with that crew and brushing everything off like that? Roger's been gaining a very unfavorable reputation as of late. I'm not surprised you don't like him. What do you mean? He knew what he meant, but maybe he could get a clue to what part of the timeline he was in. Seems that ever since we made it to Raftel, the whole world started calling him Pirate King, he stated, replacing his flask at his side. So that was their last voyage, then. They would disperse soon and then a year would pass before Ace's conception and Roger's death. Knowing that really put everything into perspective. He wasn't particularly knowledgeable of the Pirate King's reign, about the adventures he experienced or the circumstances surrounding them. Why did that man want to sail in the first place? Despite being oblivious to all of that, he was well aware of Gold Roger's infamous execution, the crowd that gathered in a Logia town square to witness the end of one era and the birth of another. He heard it many times, that the heat was almost unbearable, parching their throats as the sun beat down, but no one was willing to leave. They had to be there, to bear witness to such a monumental occasion. The man who had tamed everything fell. His blood coated the platform, falling to the dried earth as cheers echoed across the world. The people's hope renewed with the prospect of attaining the Pirate King's legacy as his heart beat its last, immortalizing his name and creating a throne above the stars to keep his legend alive. He'd arrived at the peak of Gold D. Roger's story, right after the climax and before the final resolution. The man, as he was then, was what Luffy aspired to be. Ace would be lying if he said he wasn't even a little curious. It doesn't matter, Rayleigh stated, his voice stretching across the darkened sea as he looked to the moon. The world may hate him and say he's a demon, but I've never seen someone that shone so brightly. The youth didn't understand what the first mate meant by that, but maybe he didn't have to. Maybe it didn't matter. Chilled liquid drenched his being, his body jumping in shock. That feeling was all too familiar and he panicked, reaching out to grab whatever was an arm length away as he opened his eyes. He wished he stayed asleep. Of course it was the captain's laid-back grin he was greeted with, because his life as of late loved screwing with him. When did he fall asleep? Last he recalled, he and Rayleigh were drinking. That was probably it. Alcohol didn't like his narcolepsy very much. Morning, my boy, Roger greeted with that infamous smirk of his. Piss off, Ace hissed as he stood, grumbling about the captain's oh-so-subtle attempt at waking him as he removed his shirt to wring it out, freeing it of excess water.
A chorus of laughter sprung forth from the crew as they watched the events unravel. Ace really didn't understand that bunch. Pouring a bucket of water on a sleeping devil fruit user, was the man trying to give him a heart attack. He thought he was drowning.
Could he even have a heart attack? He was technically dead, wasn't he? Pushing the thought to the back of his mind, he continued drying himself. He didn't want to think about that. Every time he did, he felt uneasy. There really wasn't any way of knowing what would happen to him after his little adventure in the past. Would he just vanish? Would he disappear? Not wanting to ponder that, he allowed his flames to take over, washing his body in protective warmth. He could feel the water evaporate, eyes on him as he displayed his skills. Of course, he hadn't really mentioned his ability to them before. Why would he? He didn't like them, didn't like conversing with them. Maybe that wasn't entirely true. Maybe he just didn't like their captain. Logia, huh? Rayleigh pondered off to the side, rubbing his beard and thought. He glanced at the blonde before turning away, dropping the shirt to the ground after finding no need for it. Mara no mi, he supplied, doing his best to keep his attention from the Pirate King. Ignoring that annoying face of his was getting easier as time went on. He couldn't say the same for that booming voice, though. Was it worth it? Roger asked, trading the ability to swim for the ability to control fire? To be honest, Ace hadn't thought of that before. He ate his fruit on accident back when he first entered the Grand Line, so he never pondered whether or not he wanted a power like that. Considering his use of it over the years, though. Yeah, he said with a nod, it was. He saved Luffy with that ability back at Alabasta. He protected his crew with it. Knowing that, it was worth it. He'd do it over again if given the chance. Roger smiled, good. With that one word, he straightened and stretched, heading over to two younger boys, Shanks and someone with a big, red nose, who had started fighting. Ace raised his eyebrow as he watched the laughing captain break up their tiff, wondering about that other kid. He'd seen him before, but where? With a nose like that, he was unmistakable. Buggy the clown. He snickered. So that pirate used to be on the Oro Jackson, huh? He certainly didn't seem the type. Everyone else who came from that crew was infamous. The Dark King Rayleigh was legendary amongst the pirates of his time. Shanks became a Yonko, attaining power similar to Oyaji's. Buggy, well, he wasn't so successful. He did recall seeing him at Marineford, though, leading the group of escapees. Maybe he was useful, after all. Shanks and Buggy turned from each other sharply and childishly stormed away from one another as their captain sheepishly scratched the back of his head. He didn't seem put off by their reaction, though. In fact, it seemed like an everyday thing. Maybe it was. The redhead spotted him and immediately headed over, not giving him a chance to retreat to his usual room. He wasn't too fond of staying on deck with Roger, but it wasn't like he had much of a choice. He'd go insane if he spent all waking hours in there. Maybe spending a little time in the same vicinity as the guy wouldn't kill him. "Hey, Ace," Shanks greeted, plopping down beside him. The fire user sent him a lopsided grin. "Hey," he replied, hunching forward as he crossed his legs. "Why were you sleeping on deck? Isn't it uncomfortable?" What should he say to that? Rubbing his neck, he thought of the best explanation. "I have narcolepsy," he stated, "so I just sort of fall asleep wherever I am." Shanks hummed in acknowledgement, pondering that for a while. "You're a Whitebeard pirate, right?" Ace nodded. That was a topic he would never tire of. "Don't all of Newgate's men wear his symbol on their body somewhere?" Wien affirmed. "Then where's yours?" Ace froze then, eyes widening. He noticed others staring at him as well, such as really. They hadn't noticed, but it was such a large tattoo, right on his back. It was, wasn't it? The pirate buried his head in his hands, hunching over in the dark of the room as he sat on the edge of his bed. Mirror shards lay shattered on the far side of the room, a testament to his anger in the moment. Frustrated shivers escaped his body as he clenched his teeth, not wanting to admit the truth. That the mark he wore so proudly on his skin was gone, leaving not a shred of proof that it was ever there. He hated it, hated that his symbol of belonging had been erased. It felt like it had never happened, the crew, the old man, their time together. He heard the door creak open but didn't react, remaining hidden behind his fingers as he tried to cope with what he just saw. There was a pause as the other assessed the situation. Then large, weighted steps resounded through the room, bouncing off the walls. He knew those steps, recognized that gate, but said not a word. At that point, he didn't care. The bed sunk beside him under his guest's weight. When the man sighed, he confirmed his identity, but it didn't matter. His grudge against him ran deep, but it was no match for how lost he felt in that moment. If he no longer had that mark, did he really have a home to return to? "It's gone," he murmured, uncaring of the one seated beside him. Releasing a shivering breath, he continued. "Oyaji's mark is gone." He could hear the other's breaths slow and even as he thought. "Is that so?" he questioned, his usually loud and boisterous voice falling quiet, solemn. It was strange, hearing the Pirate King use such a soft tone. "It doesn't make sense," Ace whispered, voice breaking as he fought to control his emotions. "It shouldn't have happened." His lip quivered as he remembered the day he got that tattoo. The cheering faces of his brothers and sisters as he removed the bandages to reveal distinguished purple and white, the proof that he belonged, that he was one of them. That he had a family, that he had a home, that he was loved. Curling deeper unto himself, running fingers through dark strands, he let out a strangled cry, almost inaudible. "How can I face them?" After a long stretch, he heard Roger release a deep breath. "You never finished telling me about your family, boy." Ace paused, his grip loosening and eyes widening. "You have a brother named Luffy, right?" Ace swallowed. "Yeah." "Who else?" For a moment, the commander had to think. His mind first flashed to a grinning blonde. No one knew about him. Not even Oyaji or Marco. He was a figment of the past, a shard from his memories that stabbed at him whenever he thought about bringing him up in conversation. Still, he found words flowing from his lips like water. "Sabo," he'd answered. "Sabo," the Pirate King echoed. "My brother," he elaborated, feeling his trembling body settle. Warmth enveloped him as his mind got caught up in the iconic memories of his childhood. The three of them together always. He was the smart one, the one who got us out of trouble. He protected you. Even without looking, he could hear the smile in the other's voice. Ace nodded, to the end. Sometimes he wondered if that was really a good thing, but he couldn't help but feel thankful knowing just how much his brother gave up to keep them safe. A jaded laugh escaped him then, but it held no malice. He just wanted to be free. "Is he?" Ace's eyes widened. He spun around to see pure curiosity on Roger's face, nothing more. There was no taunting in his voice, no judgment in his eyes. The fire user wasn't sure how to answer that, though. Was Sabo free? His mind shifted to the letter, the last words his brother gave him. "Ace, Luffy, I hope you weren't injured in the fire." Always worrying about them, even after death. That was just like him, wasn't it? Sabo was the first friend he made, the first connection he built. After spending so many years hating his lineage, hating who he was, he found someone who accepted him. At first he stayed away, but Sabo was persistent. He wouldn't let him escape and, for that, Ace was grateful. "I'm sorry to say it, but by the time you read this letter, I'll already be." He bit his lip. "Out at sea. Dead. Which one of us do you think is older?" Ace wasn't sure why Sabo told him then how he felt, never before. Maybe it was because that was his last chance. He didn't want to wait, he didn't leave with regrets. It might sound strange, but our brotherhood is my treasure. His lip quivered then and he turned away, hiding his face from his so-called father. Luffy is still a weak crybaby, but he's our little brother, so take care of him for me. Running a hand through his hair, he exhaled and sat up, staring at the wood of the ceiling. I don't know. Then, Roger stood and spoke 2 words that Ace could never hope to grasp. Are you? From off to the side, Ace watched the crew's merrymaking. They drank and laughed, dancing around the deck idiotically as they celebrated. What were they celebrating? Well, Ace didn't know either. They seemed to use anything as an excuse to hold some sort of party. To get drunk off their asses and have fun. In that respect, it was identical to the Moby. In a way, that scared him. Both crews were eerily similar, to the point that Ace sometimes forgot he wasn't home. Were it not for the unfamiliar faces or the captain's annoying mug, he might not have been able to tell the difference. Turning worn eyes from the light of the fire to his arm, he bit his lip. How had he not noticed before? The iconic black ink on his forearm had vanished just like the symbol on his back. Maybe he didn't realize because of everything that went on over the past few days. Every time he thought of it, he found himself sinking deeper. The proof of his resolve was gone. The love for his family had been stolen from his back. What did he have left? Even his hat was back in his own time, likely buried in the dirt of the island where he and Teach fought, forever forgotten. Moving to stare at the sky, he released a breath. What scared him most was that it was like none of those things were there in the first place. They never existed. When Ace thought of it like that, he wondered if his time in the future was all in his head. Did it really happen, or was he losing touch with reality? In truth, he didn't know. It could have been a lie. Maybe he hit his head when he fell into the water. When Roger found him, it could just be an internal fantasy of his. The pirate dared not to admit that theory. He didn't want it to be a lie. Luffy had to be real. Sabo was his brother. The Moby was his home. His gaze returned to the laughter and fun surrounding the crew, eyes stopping on a drinking match between Shanks and Buggy. How old were they again? Well, whatever, maybe that explained the former's alcoholism. Roger's crew could forever be blamed for the drunkard's love of booze. Typical. The commander grimaced when he heard someone slump down beside him, daring not to look. Maybe if I ignore him, he'll go away. Unfortunately, his theory was shredded when he felt a large, muscled arm wrap around his shoulders. He had to resist the urge to set the offending limb aflame. Which was hard, but he couldn't do it, could he? As much as his blood boiled whenever the man was near, he listened to Ace's plights. He didn't turn away, didn't ignore his cries nor scoff at them. Through it all, the Pirate King simply sat and listened. How could he allow himself to hate the man? Ace, the captain's voice chorused in a drunken slur. Don't set him on fire. Don't set him on fire. It's not his fault he's an idiot like. No, I will not compare them. Nope. Not happening. What are you doing over here all on your own, boy? Join in. The commander turned away, repulsed by the strong scent of alcohol on that bastard's breath. His nose scrunched up in disapproval. Ace may have been a pirate and his Cree water with booze, but that didn't mean he liked the stench. I'd rather not. Come on, Roger urged. The boys want to meet you. It's not every day one of Newgate's brats comes to visit. Laughter spread throughout the deck as he chugged more of his bottle, arms still held firmly around Ace's neck. No, he refused. I'm fine here. The captain let out a long, depressed sigh. Suit yourself. As he tipped back the bottle, allowing the final few droplets of poison to trickle down his throat, he watched the skies. Amidst the dark clouds and murky depths fluttered something light. He threw the glass over his shoulder, ignoring it when someone behind him cussed, and reached out. Ace couldn't help but glimpse at the pirate occasionally as the arm slipped from his shoulders to reach out to a gull as its talons opened, leaving a paper to drop to the captain's hand. As Roger read whatever was written in dark ink, the commander grew curious. He hadn't seen such a serious expression on that man's face yet. It was intimidating. Worrying. Whatever that letter said, it had to be bad. Something was wrong, horribly. He laughed. Roger laughed. When the freckled youth's gaze shot to his face, his features softened, seeing a wide, confident, impossible grin. The more he saw, the harder it became to deny that the Pirate King reminded him of Luffy. It was strange. They weren't related, never met, yet in some respects they were so similar, so identical, that it was hard to tell them apart. Men, Roger's voice boomed through the salty mist, carried across the sea. The merriment ceased, a deep silence falling as everyone turned to their leader. If possible, the man's grin widened, the red of his coat standing out more than ever against the deep, unknown abyss surrounding them. What do you say to a little company? At first everything was still. Ace peered at each of their faces, searching for some clue to what was going on. He spun around in confusion, wondering what Roger meant. Were they going to battle? Did someone challenge his crew? But then, amongst them all he saw Shanks, his youthful face breaking out into a wide smile. Everyone else followed before cheers rang out into the night, fists rising into the air. Okay, he was thoroughly confused. The hell was going on? The light sank behind the earth, bringing about the end of his third day on that goddamn ship. He never bothered to ask about what happened the previous night, opting to spend most of the morning and early afternoon asleep in his room. His narcolepsy was sure to keep him in there until long past noon. It didn't matter, though. Now, with the moon peeking from beyond the horizon, he knew what the fuss was about. How could he ever mistake that whale figurehead for anything else? Ace could feel the warm rush of blood as it circulated through his limbs and head, swirling about in response to the mad thumping of his heart. It pounded harder and harder against his chest, threatening to burst as the massive vessel sailed closer. Panic set in. What could he do? What could he say? He was more than 20 years in the past. None of them would recognize him. He wasn't even born yet. The questions circling his head the past few days returned with a vengeance. What could he do? The last thing he wanted was to be reunited with his family, his symbol of belonging stolen from him, to not be remembered. Hesitantly, he took a step back, and another, and a firm hand pressed against his shoulder, squeezing enough to catch his attention. His head spun around, facing the slightly taller figure of the man clad in red. Roger didn't look at him, said not a word. He simply stood there, his touch being all Ace needed to feel safe. When did he let that man get so close? The Moby and Oro Jackson floated alongside one another, boardwalks stretching between them. Ace watched with great trepidation as the captain took long, confident strides across the deck.
He found himself following unconsciously, stopping at the rail. Roger continued on, though, crossing over to the other vessel. He found his hands twitching nervously against the splintered wood of the Oro Jackson, muscles clenched tightly as he watched the Pirate King stroll up to the large figure he knew as Oyaji, who could be no other. But from that distance he couldn't make out faces well. He wondered what they were doing. Would the captains fight? They were enemies, right? Rivals.
The commander swallowed. That was a fight he would never want to miss, but at the same time he didn't want a battle to break out. He was tired, far too tired for combat. After Marineford, he needed a break from it all. He didn't want to see his brothers die. He saw Roger make random gestures, not hearing the words meant to accompany them. Then, after a few minutes, the captain turned back to his crew, waving. Immediately the atmosphere around them relaxed, but the fire user wasn't sure what to make of it. Was that it? They just wanted to chat. But then Shanks lunged at the boardwalk, running across to the enemy ship with that Luffy-like grin on his face. Others followed shortly while the remainder of the crew returned to their tasks, worry absent from their faces. But Roger was still waving, waiting for him, and that nervous anxiety rose up once more.
It only took a few seconds for Ace to realize that he didn't have much of a choice. The captain wasn't going to let him just walk away. No, that man was too pushy, too stubborn. It took a while for the fire user to gather the courage to cross the boardwalk. For once his impulsivity took a back seat to his apprehension and, in the most conflicted moment of his life, he decided to approach the Moby. A flood of nostalgia attacked his senses as he took in the smell of salt and wood, so alike yet unlike the Oro Jackson. How long had it been since he last set foot on that ship? Months, he realized. Not once had he returned since setting out to find Teach. If he had, maybe Marineford could have been avoided. Maybe he wouldn't have had to watch his brothers fall, all because of his own naivety. The commander stopped after hopping off the rail, body stiff as trepidation took over. Gray eyes roved over the deck, so familiar yet unknown. He took a deep breath. Everything was just as he remembered it. Still, it wasn't exact. The ship seemed young, just as one would expect after arriving in the past. More and more one realization permeated his thoughts, drowning out every one of his musings. They don't know who you are. Come on, boy. Roger's voice snapped him away from his internal struggle and he looked up, towards the noise, eyes widening. Looking past the Pirate King, his gaze fell on a tall, intimidating figure, heart swelling with fondness. Oyaji. But he was different. He had hair, among other things. So that was the soon-to-be strongest man in the world, Edward Newgate in his prime, clad in white. He sat in a chair exactly as Ace remembered him. Something was different, aside from the obvious subtraction of years on his body. He felt more relaxed. Was that because of Roger? Weren't they enemies? Eventually he found himself walking over to the Pirate King. His body went rigid when he felt the man slap his back with a hearty laugh. When an arm came around his shoulders he had to fight to not set it aflame. He hated how touchy the man was. Ace had never been one to invade personal space, but apparently the same couldn't be said for his genetic donor. He felt Newgate watching him, studying him. Who's this? He questioned, not holding much interest as he took a swig from the flask at his side. Roger laughed. This is my son. He felt the color drain from his face as he spun around to look at the Pirate King, eyes doubling in size. What? He was hushed, a grin appearing on his father's face. You made it pretty obvious, he whispered low, close to his ear. Pulling away, the pirate grinned at his rival. Name's Ace. He really admires you. Gurarara, Whitebeard laughed,
the sound soothing Ace's nerves. For the moment he ignored his erratic thoughts, simp before him. He'd missed him, missed them all. Is that so, brat? Suddenly all eyes were on him. He looked around, spotting many familiar faces amongst the crowd, before turning back to Oyaji. He swallowed before nodding. Again Whitebeard laughed. That sound brought him from his fears, making it feel like everything was going to be alright. He was home. Stop, thieves! An angry cook shouted from the cobblestone shore, seething with rage as he watched the assailants leap high into the air, landing with ease atop the arch bridge crossing the river. The brothers stopped, exchanging amused looks before spinning around and entering low bows. Thanks for the food. The chef's face heated in frustration as he ran towards them, his speed and his older age not nearly enough to match theirs. Pay your bill. She. Luffy laughed as he looked down at the man, turning to continue on before he paused. Where was Ace? Spinning in circles his face went blank, completely baffled by his siblings' whereabouts. But then he heard it, soft snoring from below. He wasn't quick enough, looking over the rail only seconds after hearing a loud splash. Ace? As he peered down at the river, ignoring the man still chasing him, his mouth gaped as he saw something bright floating atop the waves. Ah, Ace! Immediately he reached out, arms stretching to grab the orange object before the current pulled it too far. The limb retracted with a snap and the Pirate King's eyes bulged as he stared at the person Les had in his hand. Shit! Ace! He peered down once more, inwardly cursing when he realized that his sibling's body must have been dragged under. How had the devil fruit user even fallen off the bridge? Narcolepsy or no, there was a railing to prevent something like that. Pulling his mouth taut, not noticing when the cook almost caught up to him, he placed the brightly colored hat on his head and stretched his rubbery appendage once more, latching onto the top of a building as he hefted himself forward, following the current. He wasn't going to let some stupid river take his brother. So, was that how Ace felt after having to rescue him so many times as a child? He hoped not. For a while he couldn't breathe. Air was ripped from his lungs, replaced by heavy fluid that brought with it the rush of death. He opened his eyes to nothing but the rapids which engulfed him, arms flailing about desperately in a pathetic attempt to rise to the surface. He wasn't sure how he ended up there, drowning alone in the cold, murky depths. Eventually, though, he found his efforts fruitless. He stopped moving, gazing up at the distorted sun through the water. So this is how I die, huh? His chest was tightening as he thought that, a little disappointed. After all, a pirate drowning was more funny than tragic. After finding out he didn't have long to live, he hoped that he'd at least have a cool death. Something that would leave an impact on the world, proof that he lived. Hadn't Luffy said that he was there when Ace died? He was looking forward to that. Above all else, seeing his little brother's face as his life ended was the most he could ask for. He loved the brat. This sucks. Suddenly as consciousness faded he found himself being grabbed. Vision a haze of oxygen-deprived confusion. He couldn't think as he was dragged from the water, pulled upwards until his back was slammed hard against something he, in his state, could not identify. There was a woman hovering above him, panting heavily as her drenched hands swept the bangs from his eyes. Still he couldn't breathe and she seemed to notice, bending forward to press her lips against his as he closed his eyes, allowing sleep to take over. The repeated pressure on his chest faded out of mind and, deprived of proper air still, his thoughts returned to black. When he felt his body, still very much alive, he awoke with a jolt, hungrily gasping for air as he remembered the dark river water that surrounded him when he was last conscious. Sitting up on the mat beneath him, Ace looked around wearily at his surroundings. The cottage he was in was small, only one room. It wasn't in the greatest of condition but, honestly, growing up in a hut outside of Dayton's. Ace, before he knew what was going on, a pair of rubbery limbs wrapped around his neck, squeezing so hard he thought he might lose oxygen. Again. Oi, Lu, that was all he managed to choke out as he spotted the head of matted dark hair buried in the crook of his neck. Fortunately the pirate seemed to notice his pleas and pulled away, a reprimanding look on his face as he began to look his age, something that had been a rare sight throughout their time together. Don't ever do that again. Ace blinked, dumbfounded, but took note of the urgency in his words. He'd really worried Luffy, huh? But what did I do? In response, the man's face went from scolding to pouty and he, once more, looked as young and jovial as ever. Well, at least it looked like he wasn't actually angry. Somehow he doubted that an angry pirate king was something he wanted to see. You almost drowned, he stated simply, eyes falling to the sheets caressing his older sibling's legs. Well, he knew that much. How? You fell asleep, stupid. Oi, I don't want you calling me stupid. That's an insult within an insult. Then don't get yourself killed. Hey, it wasn't like I. Ace had to stop himself, his face softening as he spotted the slight trembling of his brother's hands. Luffy wasn't normally like that. Hell, they had plenty of near-death experiences as children and never had he looked so desperate. That wasn't like him. But the more he thought, the more he saw a resemblance to a time long ago. He remembered sitting in an empty hut much like that one, huddled in a corner as his tiny, frail little brother lay on a mat, covered in fresh bandages. "I'm weak." He swallowed the lump forming in his throat. "Sorry." Luffy simply shook his head, glancing out the window so that he faced away from his sibling. "It's too early, okay?" Yeah. The thickness in the air was enough to make him feel like he was drowning again, so he was quick to think of a change in topic. "So, where are we?" "Moda had me carry you here until you woke up." "Moda?" Ace echoed, raising an eyebrow. He'd never heard the name before, that was certain. Luffy looked back at him, grinning. So apparently that girl, Moda, or whatever, had been the one to pull him from the river and resuscitate him earlier. Admittedly, he was impressed. She was just a kid about 15, and the fact that she could drag a man his size from the fast current of the river was certainly something to admire, especially considering how petite she was. The fact that a girl her age, living all alone on a dairy farm, openly welcomed two complete strangers into her home was a bit odd, yes, but the request she made after feeding the two black holes, he felt bad, really he did, was enough to leave Ace slack-jawed and sputtering as he tried to think of a response. Luffy, the little bastard, had just laughed. Apparently she'd asked while the Whitebeard pirate was still out of it after determining that he was out of danger. With his older younger brother beside him, the girl across the table and the letter resting ominously halfway between, he sighed. "So wait," he started, rubbing his temple, "you want us," he pointed between them, "to deliver that?" The girl nodded as she flattened out the material of her skirt, not once glancing away. Her eye contact was eerily consistent. To a different island, he parroted what he'd heard earlier, shooting a dull glare at the Pirate King who was trying, and failing, to keep in his giggles. Again, there was a nod, but that was where it got serious. "To a marine base?" he questioned in a shout, annoyance shining clear through his blunt intonation. "You realize we're pirates, right? We're wanted men. Him especially," he added as he tossed his thumb his sibling's way. "I know," she replied simply, completely unaffected by what he was saying. "He's going to be the Pirate King, right?" Ace just looked at Luffy. And the damn brat smiled back like nothing was wrong. One of those days, he was going to be the end of his big brother. He just knew it. It was only a matter of time before Luffy's careless stupidity landed him 6 feet under. "I'm not telling you to go," she continued, "just asking." While that eel like they had much of a choice, what with her saving his life and all that. "Oh, you're drowning. Here, let me help you. But then I'm going to get you killed trying to repay me. Hope you don't mind." Ace snorted at his own thoughts. "Come on, Ace." The Pirate King whined from his seat, legs swinging back and forth impatiently. "Let's do it." The youth raised an eyebrow. What did she do to win the little rubber freak over? Is this an adventure thing? That grin would have torn a normal person's face in half. No, it's a food thing. When Ace turned his questioning gaze to the girl, she smiled. "I promised to prepare something for the journey." Everything went quiet. She just stared, and stared, and stared. "Fuck it, you win." Ace stood on Striker's back, hand clasped against the mast as they drifted off. Luffy waving energetically to the girl seeing them off at the docks. The space that was usually free for them to sit was stolen away by the slightly ridiculous bag of supplies. All edible and most for the little shit at the skiff's other end. "Bye-bye, Moda. Take care," the Pirate King shouted as he laughed, the island beginning to shrink into the distance. Watching his brother, Ace had to smile. He admitted that, while opposed to the idea of traveling with the kid in the beginning, having him around was kind of nice. He'd left home 3 years ago. They hadn't spent time together in what felt like so long and what was, to Luffy, longer still. And while he knew that they had their own paths to follow, their own lives to live, there were still times when he missed his little brother so much that it physically hurt. Could you blame him? What irked him most was it was probably worse for that man, knowing that they would never meet again. The only regret he knew he would hold when that day came was that Luffy would miss him. He had seen his baby brother fulfill his dream. He'd found a home. A family that accepted and loved him, so what more could he ask for? "Ace, I'm hungry," Luffy whined as the island shrunk to a mean speck along the horizon, his mouth watering as he gawked unabashedly at the bag of provisions Moda had given them. The brat. "You just ate, Lou," he stated with a roll of his eyes, unable to fully hide the grin on his face. "Just like old times, huh? But I'm hungry again." With a sigh, he plopped down cross-legged on Striker and reached for the bag. "No helping it, then," he said with feigned annoyance as he tossed a loaf of seasoned bread at his sibling. She. Having determined that Blackbeard wasn't on the island and successfully causing the cooks of every restaurant in the vicinity to seethe with hatred and rage, demanding their debts to be paid, the brothers saw no reason to linger there any longer. While it had been a fun little side stop, they had no more business there. That was why they had left for their other casual adventure so quickly. Moda seemed pleased. She could rest assured that with a Whitebeard commander and the Pirate King acting as her couriers, her letter would be delivered safely. "Is there any meat? Come on, I'm still hungry." "You're always hungry?" Well, at least they would try. The marine base they were to visit was the Grand Line's 2nd Division, which, to their pleasant surprise, was actually located right near the island. It was only a short 45-minute sail from the docks at their last stop, meaning that they wouldn't have to set aside their search for very long. It shouldn't be too hard, breaking into a marine base to deliver a letter, right? As he watched his sibling dig through the bag in search of more to stuff his face with, Ace had to smile. It seemed their little side trip was doing well for the rubber idiot. He was looking a lot less tense. The further they progressed, the more stressed his companion looked. Something was coming, but, well, it wasn't like he was going to ask about it. They'd been traveling together for about 5 weeks, and in that time the commander came to understand that any talk of the future, unless just innocent curiosity, was dangerous territory. That was probably because of Whitebeard. Ace knew he knew. And if Luffy was under strict orders from the captain, he had to be, since otherwise he would have blurted the whole 10 years to him. He wouldn't question it. Still, he was happy to see him actually enjoying himself. He just hoped Thatch wouldn't be upset with delayed vengeance. Ooh! Luffy's eager exclamation had him leaving his thoughts and blinking back to reality, head turning to see the base finally in view. Guess it's showtime, he said with a grin, herding the food away from his brother who, yammering about all the things he wanted to try before leaving, no mention of the task at hand, of course, had finally stopped eating. Within 15 minutes they docked Striker on the far side of the rocky land mass, away from the entrance, and had acquired some uniforms through questionable means. Sadly that meant he had to wear a shirt and cover up the mark he wore so proudly on his back, but it was a necessary sacrifice. After tying up the Marines they'd beaten bloody and putting on their disguises, his brother dropped to the ground in peals of laughter. What? Ace growled out, resisting the urge to hit the man for being so obnoxiously loud on enemy grounds. Why you? Luffy gasped between breaths, unable to hold back his amusement, you look ridiculous. So do you, moron, Ace exclaimed, slamming a hockey-infused fist into the Pirate King's skull. The man acted hurt but, really, he could tell it was just that, an act. It was kind of embarrassing, knowing that his baby brother was so much stronger. He had to admit, the getup was pretty hilarious for two pirates to be dressed in. They had gone so far as to toss hat. What? He wasn't about to think of some special title for the headwear he always sported, in Striker, and replace it with one of the Marines' iconic white caps, making him feel even more out of place. Even with it, he would be shocked if no one recognized him. The uniform sleeve didn't cover his arm tattoo by any means and his face certainly wasn't obscured by the cap's rim. Well, whatever. Opting to leave the shirt unbuttoned and the neckerchief untied, he turned to see his brother already clothed, looking just as funny as he did wearing misleading white uniform they usually stood against. But he didn't say anything because he was more mature than that idiot. It was pretty ironic seeing the future Pirate King like that, though. Let's go, Luffy commanded excitedly, raising a fist into the air. The commander raised an eyebrow. You're acting suspicious, Lou. He just grinned. I have something I want to check out. So how, exactly, did looking for an office turn into a run to the cafeteria?
The lunch hall was bustling with life, almost as packed as what Ace experienced living on the Moby, and there he and his brother were with 3 trays each, garnering the attention of every commissioned officer in the room, for different reasons.
See, while Luffy was stuffing his face so fast it was almost godly, Ace was standing over some poor bastard who dared to insult Oyaji. He was seething, but it didn't take long for the fire logia to cool down well enough to realize what a stupid mistake he'd made as heads rounded on him. Everything freezing as an important discovery was made. Captain Ace is a fake. Shit, he cursed, turning on his heel to cuff his brother and bolt out of the room. I'm not done eating yet, the boy complained as he dragged behind, his free hand stretching to latch onto whatever edibles he could find. Just shut up and run. The brothers sped blindly down the halls, getting more lost as time went on and eventually finding themselves rounding the corner into an office and instinctively knocking out the man waiting inside. The commanding officer fell like a brick, leaving Ace to sigh and wipe his brow as he thought of how they were going to get themselves out of that fine mess they'd made. He could hear his pursuers running far longer than he liked. And for once it wasn't his idiot brother's fault, just his idiot self.
Now what? He mumbled to himself, rubbing the back of his neck as he pulled his mouth taut and started around the walls of the room, examining the various medals displayed and the papers laden on the desk at the far end. He checked the nameplate, frown deepening when he confirmed that it wasn't the office they were looking for. Well, at least they hadn't beaten Mouta's buddy, right? We gotta find the guy, Luffy stated dumbly, cheerily, as though it weren't obvious. The younger older brother dropped into the swivel chair, sinking into its back as he drummed his fingers along the desk, so accustomed to his sibling's stupid comments that he wasn't even fazed by that one. Glancing down to the unconscious body at Luffy's feet, Ace thought. He could switch disguises if he wanted, which could help with a quick getaway, but that left the problems of Luffy and the undelivered letter. Well, shit, you're taking this well, he stated, catching the others' attention to pass the time. They could always wait it out, though Marines were pretty anal about things like that. They probably wouldn't let up until the entire premises had been searched. The pirate grinned in that usual way he did, a few last stolen entrees in his hands. I've done this a few times.
He raised an eyebrow. How many sa few? The man furrowed his brow as he leaned back against the wall, staring at the ceiling. How many times did it take before you had to actually think of the answer? About 52. Ace sputtered. Why? His only response was a shrug. I get bored, and Kobe's the fleet admiral now, so it's the only way I can visit him. Fleet admiral? You're friends with the fleet admiral? She, yeah. Well, it was Luffy. Can't believe I'm going to miss that. The air grew still, the only sound being the harsh patter of footsteps out in the hall, rushing past as they searched for their intruders. Perhaps he should have been more careful about thinking and not saying that last bit. He felt kind of stupid, seeing as he knew his death was a sensitive topic for the pirate. They may not have been blood relatives, but he was starting to think that stupidity ran in the family. Then, a small voice cut through the quiet. You're not. He blinked, sitting up straight as he gawked at the man wearing an expression that said he wouldn't lie. What? I won't let you. Taking in those words, Ace settled once more. Lou. All right, the Pirate King shouted, lifting his arms into the air with fierce determination. Let's go. Ace blinked. Go? He echoed. Go where? Luffy smirked once more, nodding past Ace at the sole window. This is the 4th floor and there's nothing but water down there. What? Oh no, you aren't going to. Before he could finish, a rubbery hand latched onto the collar of his shirt and he was sent sailing out the window, plunging to the blue depths with enough speed to send his head spinning. Hadn't he had enough near-death experiences for one day? But just as he was nearing the water's threshold, he was jerked to a stop, Luffy's other hand gripping the basie's rooftop. He retracted, flinging them up with a force so strong Ace thought he'd left his stomach behind. See, we're out. The division commander found himself clutching his chest, wide eyes snapping up to his sibling's face. Never again. She. The scout ship's on fire. What about the Doans? All burned, sir. Is everyone okay? No, sir. It seems some men are trapped on board. The coffee was bitter. It left a bad taste in his mouth. Not that he particularly enjoyed coffee to begin with. He didn't much care for tea, either. Actually, Ace was more of a rum kind of guy, regardless of the time of day. It wasn't like the alcohol did much to him and he liked the taste, so it was his preferred drink when working aboard Oyaji's ship. Not that he was the only one, plenty of his crewmates would. Ace. He flinched at the flat tone his little brother used, sounding almost like a scolding parent, at least, what he thought a scolding parent sounded like. With that thought in mind, he didn't bother to turn towards the voice. Ace, the man called again, sounding more grown up than he looked. Actually, despite being, 27 or something like that? He still looked pretty young. Maybe it had something to do with his fruit. I don't like seeing people die. He pulled his mouth taut, allowing the mug to hover just below his chin as they, in their new disguises, leaned against the lower wall, Marines frantically rushing towards the open sea. What started it? One asked as they ran. We're not sure. Shit, that looks bad, another commented. The brothers remained still as the men passed, the quiet so perfect that they could hear the hollers from the shore. He wouldn't apologize. Luffy was too soft, even 7 years older as he was. He seemed to forget that the people at that base were their enemies. The ship carried information on pirates, possibly his own kin. It had to burn. If a few Marines lost their lives because of that, well, casualties were sometimes part of the collateral. He was a pirate. Pirates weren't exactly nice people. I'm going, Luffy stated, leaving him to sigh and groan in annoyance. Alright, he deflated, I'll go save him. Alright. I don't want to deal with the smell of burnt rubber when we set out. He shoved his coffee into the elder's hands, not looking at his face as he stalked away. Deliver the letter while I take care of that. Alright. 3rd floor, 2nd room on the right. He didn't have to see the Pirate King's smile to know it was there. Thanks, Ace. Yeah, he grumbled, walking a little too leisurely for someone about to face an inferno. Sure, he knew Luffy could take care of it, but the thought of his little brother cleaning up after his mess didn't feel right. He knew he'd taken it a little far when he left a few men trapped aboard to burn, but he'd been having a bad day. A really bad day. And, having finally located the office of the recipient, he wanted to get the hell out of there. He heard the Marines shouting that one of their own had entered the inferno as he landed on the ship, but he paid it little mind. Locating the trapped men hadn't been hard, and as his eyes roved over their helpless expressions, he felt guilt rise up from his gut, a memory of long ago resurfacing to make him feel disgusted with himself. Is that the expression you wore back then, Sabo? I'll be back soon, Ace, don't worry. Luffy beamed at his brother from the ship they'd borrowed from the Marine base. Apparently he'd promised the old man that he would check in every once in a while. Even had a Viva card so that he wouldn't get lost. He still wasn't too keen to trust Luffy on his own, but, well, he found Ace, so it should be fine, right? He was an adult, he could take care of himself. Right? I wasn't worried, he replied, grinning at him. Maybe now I can get some progress done instead of going on random side quests. Keep this with you, alright? He asked, handing a baby Den Mushi to his sibling. Ace's hands hesitated a moment, feeling something foreboding in his sibling's words, but did as he was told. Honestly, he'd be tempted to use it to call his crew if it weren't for the fact that he knew they'd be pissed at him. And don't fight Teach until I get back. I won't, he lied. Promise? With those worried eyes staring at him, there was no way he could lie. So he settled for avoiding the subject. Just get going already. I'll be fine, Lou. The Pirate King smiled, stepping away from Stryker and plopping down in the middle of his boat. But a question surfaced in his mind that he just had to ask. Hey, he called, what was in the letter? The amusement in that smile was criminal. She was advertising the milk from her farm. Seriously? All of this for that? She runs a business? Well, couldn't argue with that. So instead he sat down on it his brother, sad to see him go. Though he wouldn't admit that. He could be a pest and he wasn't exactly the same as the Luffy he remembered from his past, but he was still his brother, his little brother. I'm going, Ace. Take care, Lou. The pirate grinned, bye-bye. As the man drifted off, sailing further and further from the small, yellow vessel he was stationed on, Ace felt the forced curve of his mouth fall, a mesh of thoughts rushing into his mind. Don't say, goodbye, unless you mean it, Lou. Traveling alone was so boring. Sure, over the many years he'd sailed the Grand Line and New World there were plenty of times Luffy had been out on his own, left to venture the waters by himself. And he hated it every time. What he loved about being a pirate was the freedom and the adventure that lurked at every new island they visited, yes. But without people to experience it with it was hardly fun at all.
And being away from his brother, someone who he'd practically been attached to for the past 5 weeks or so, left him feeling empty. As much as he knew he had to make that trip back to the Moby, had promised the giant old man he would, he couldn't push away the feelings of wrongness crowding his thoughts. He wanted to stay with his brother. He wanted to be with Ace.
Because if they failed, he would never see him again. It took a long time, more than just a few simple days, but eventually Luffy found himself grinning up at the main ship of the Whitebeard pirates. Seeing it after so long reminded him that it was huge. His main ship wasn't that big. Sunny was. Well, the same as always. He didn't need it any bigger, after all. The crew was quick to notice his presence and threw a rope ladder down to him, which he completely disregarded. Instead he stretched his arm, sending the rubbery appendage to latch onto the rail of the ship before flinging himself up. Shouts of surprise echoed across the deck as he landed aboard with a thud, an impossible grin splitting his face as he looked around. Whitebeard was in his chair as per usual, smiling at the Pirate King as he lifted his giant tankard to his mouth. But Luffy wasn't looking for him. He felt that, before getting down to business, he should at least greet his crew, 2 commanders specifically. The pirates all welcomed him back, greeting him happily and ruffling his hair as though he wasn't the captain of another crew, as though he was one of them. He really liked Ace's family, his crew. They were all so nice, so accepting and open, and he would have been lying if he said that they weren't perfect for his brother. Ace, even when he was young he understood that side of Ace that he didn't want him to see, that part that loathed his own life and lineage. He'd seen it too many times since the tender age of 7 to ignore it. Now, though, now that he'd attained the same title and status as Roger, as Ace's father, he could empathize. He could truly, wholly understand how his brother felt. That was why he knew Ace needed that crew, needed the old man. He needed acceptance. They gave him that. Trying to hide the solemn nature of his thoughts, Luffy grinned as he spotted just who he was looking for, both men leaning against the mast. Marco, Thatch, he greeted as he rushed them, patting them eagerly on their shoulders as he laughed. You actually came back, the redhead teased as he shifted his stance, a slight look of discomfort on his face. May standing aggravated his wound. Thought we'd have to use a crowbar to pry you away from your little brother. The Pirate King's face sagged into a pout. I promised, so I came, but I'm hungry. The cook laughed. Guess I'll have to fix something up for you, won't I? She. The satisfaction in his laugh practically oozed excitement. Thatch's food was amazing. The fact that he and Ace were both terrible cooks might have had something to do with it, too, admittedly. But first he should catch up, right? How do you feel? He hoped he was doing well. Fine, Thatch replied, brushing off his concerns with a grin. It's mostly healed now, just gets kinda sore when I stand for too long. I'll go fix up a snack for you, 'kay kid? The Pirate King was practically bouncing on the balls of his feet. Food? Oh god, how long had it been since he'd eaten? 3 hours? His stomach noised its protest at the mere mention of the word as the redhead laughed and disappeared beneath the deck, leaving him alone with the blue chicken that was, well, currently not a blue chicken. Chicken, he wondered offhandedly if anyone ever tried to eat the first mate. I ought to thank you, Marco's voice called, breaking him from his thoughts on how tasty mythical zones were. Not that he would ever try to eat Marco or anything like that, he was just curious, and hungry. Hunger did terrible things to him. Luffy blinked up at the man, owlish eyes just as empty as usual. For what? The blonde closed his eyes and folded his arms over his chest. For saving my little brother. But I didn't, you did. The certainty in his voice was drowned out only by the gratitude, and honestly the whole thing felt strange to Luffy. He wasn't used to hearing such a tone from the future Yonko. While he got along well with the Marco of his time, he always seemed to get on the man's nerves. He couldn't count the amount of times the man told him to go home before he made him go home. So hearing such fondness from the blonde was surreal. If you hadn't warned him, he would be dead. He owes you his life, Yoi. He really never thought of it like that. It wasn't like he told Thatch on purpose.
The man eavesdropped. But now that he realized, he was happy he did. He was happy to see someone he'd never met before his trip to the past, to meet them and know that when he returned to his crew, his nakama, there would be one more person waiting for him. At least, that was how time travel worked, wasn't it? When he went back, the things he'd changed, the people he saved, they would be there waiting for him, wouldn't they?
Suddenly someone hollered down from the crow's nest. He couldn't make out what they said, but it seemed Marco could as the phoenix unfolded his arms and straightened his posture. Looks like you'll have to wait to talk to Oyaji, he stated as he walked towards the railing at the bow of the ship. Luffy tilted his head. What? His only response was a nod towards the distance, which his eyes obediently followed. He squinted. A ship. A big ship. The Red Force. Shanks's ship. If his grin was impossible before, it now defied logic, splitting his face in two the way it did. He trembled with excitement, resisting the urge to fling himself onto the other Yonko's ship. Oh God, did he miss him. He hadn't seen him in about half a year now, adding up the months he spent in both the past-present, or should he say present and future. And while that was nothing compared to the many long years they spent apart before he became the Pirate King, he still missed him. Because even if he'd risen above him, Shanks would always be his hero. But he couldn't see him, could he? That wasn't fair. He knew it could mess up something important in the past, but it was Shanks. Young Shanks. Shanks was all old and stuff in his time. Nevertheless, he obeyed when Newgate beckoned him to his side, watched in silence as the captain told his anxious crew to allow the man on board. That he didn't seem to be a threat. If you're weak, stand back, Yoi. You can't handle that man, Marco stated casually. What do you mean? It doesn't matter. Go inside, Yoi. As soon as the other Yonko's foot stepped down on the Moby, a wave of Conqueror's haki had most of the pirates dropping like flies. Even Luffy, the Pirate King himself, could feel its effects. He wasn't fazed by it but was impressed nonetheless, watching as even pieces of the ship were crushed under the intensity of his haki as he walked across the deck, a giant tankard being dragged behind him. What's going on? One of the pirates called worriedly as he watched his brothers fall one by one. What's happening? Marco groaned from his place by the rail, sighing as he watched the weaker members of the crew get taken out by the force of the Yonko's haki. Eventually he heaved a sigh. It's already too late. He closed his eyes as Shanks stepped further onto the ship. Don't panic. They just lost consciousness, Yoi. A big man beside him, Luffy recalled him being named Jozu, stood upright at that. If you're half prepared, you won't be able to hold your senses before THT. A majority of the men were down with an exception of the commanders, leading Luffy to laugh. He'd forgotten about that, as Shanks's haki no longer bothered the members of the Straw Hat crew. His haki's as impressive as usual. The Pirate King's excitement flared up once more as a particularly strong wave split the wooden railings of the ship, leading Marco to scowl. Shanks was so cool. The redhead eventually stopped in front of the captain, a confident smile on his face. Excuse me, he greeted, I had to be on guard since this is an enemy ship. Whitebeard went unfazed by his appearance, but Luffy saw the way the old man glanced at him, as though to tell him to keep quiet. Well, he could try. But he was hungry. And that was Shanks. And he was hungry. How mad would they be if he roasted Marco? He was a phoenix, his limbs would grow back, wouldn't there? Hunger made him a terrible person. Just seeing your face makes the wound that bastard gave me ache, Newgate stated, opting to skip the formal greeting. Did they know each other? Who was that bastard he was talking about? The more Luffy thought, the more he started to realize that even as the Pirate King he didn't know much about their history. Nami would argue that he didn't know much of anything, but he was hungry. Somehow that statement seemed relevant to everything. I've no intention to fight. I brought a gift, he stated, gesturing to the tankard he had been towing behind him. There's something I want to talk with you about. Is that all you have to say after using my men to display your haki, you idiot? Newgate added with a laugh. Oi, Akagami, Marco interrupted from his place seated atop the rail. Luffy's eyes scrolled over to him, noting that he wasn't very amused by the display. Bastard, look what you did, Yoi. The first mate had a point. There were a lot of bodies on the ground. Shanks just smiled at him, oblivious to the look on his face and tone of his voice. Marco, the 1st Division commander, right? Won't you join my crew? Shut up. Luffy wasn't used to hearing the Phoenix speak so crudely. If he remembered, in his time the Yonkos got along, though not well. He did recall the blonde telling him that he didn't like Shanks before, though. Was that what he was seeing? Shanks wasn't affected by that, just continued smiling. Oyaji, should we? Yeah, it appears this isn't war. Leave us alone. With those words from their father, The men did their best to ignore their visitor and get back to the tasks they'd been assigned, but the old man gestured for Luffy to stay put. He did just that, remaining beside the enormous chair where the captain was seated, trying to control and contain all of the excitement welling up inside him, because he promised he would behave. After pouring the sake into a giant Sakazuki cup, the redhead tossed the tankard with the remaining alcohol to Whitebeard. Luffy ignored their conversation about the drink Shanks had brought, not caring that it was from West Blue where Shanks was from. It did nothing for his hunger and was therefore unimportant. Roger, Garp, Sengoku, only a few who knew the seas back then still remain. Of course, it's been 22 years, after all, Shanks pointed. They spoke in calm, dignified tones until the air grew thick, waited. Whitebeard, Shanks started. I've been through numerous battles and received many wounds, but right now, the one that aches, he paused, raising his remaining arm to the scar over his eye, is this one. Luffy looked up at the captain's face. He seemed to know what it meant. The one who gave me this was one of yours, Blackbeard Teach. The Pirate King's blood ran cold and suddenly he wanted to step forward. Newgate's arm pushed him back, though, managing to go unnoticed by the other Yonko. But Luffy wasn't sure how much longer he could keep it up. It's not like I was being careless. Do you know what I'm saying? Shanks was serious. And suddenly Luffy wasn't sure he was going to like what he was going to hear. He was quietly waiting for a chance. He passed up the title of commander to conceal himself. Up until now he remained hidden under the shadow of the name, Whitebeard, and in order to gain power, he made his move. Luffy clenched his fist, remembering that night, waking up and going on deck to hear his brother's furious screams. Teach wants to make it to the top with his own will. He may even come to steal your title. And Luffy knew he would get it, too, if something wasn't done. It was quiet, at first, before Whitebeard narrowed his eyes and straightened, looking down on the much smaller man. What do you want me to do? That's the real question. Shanks met his stare with furrowed brows and a firm resolve. Please, stop Ace. A chill ran up Luffy's spine, eyes wide. Before he knew what he was doing he found himself stepping past the captain's arm, standing in between the two Yonko. Shanks looked confused, unable to recognize him, but he didn't swell on it. We'll have Ace, he stated in a voice that left no room for objections. He won't die. The redhead looked him up and down before narrowing his eyes. Who? Luffy wasn't given a chance to mess up farther, the first mate quickly pacing over to him to whack him on the head. Ow! You're an idiot, Yoi. Stay out of this. But Marco, he whined with a pout, rubbing the spot where a hockey-infused fist collided with the back of his skull. Don't, Luffy. This is important, Yoi. Luffy? Both turned to the Yonko, watching as he blinked their way, leading the blonde to groan and swipe his hand through his hair. You know him, Yoi? He grinned. He gave me my hat, she. As Shanks came to fully understand the situation, Luffy's mood picked up. He wouldn't let it get to him. For now, he just had to look ahead. Dwelling on the past would do no good. Meanwhile, oceans away, a battle had started. A sun-tanned arm hooked around his shoulders and pulled him close as laughter, loud and full, floated across the deck. Luffy found himself smiling along with it. The excitement the redhead exuded contagious even when paired with a conversation as foreboding as the one that brought them to meet. Look at you, he exclaimed, you're all grown up. Well duh, I'm 27, you are, aren't you? Dahahaha. That was what he loved about Shanks. He could always brighten even the most dreary of moods. Luffy supposed he should be more concerned as he'd likely changed yet another major event in the past, especially seeing as the Akagami pirates had stayed well into the evening, but he couldn't bring himself to care. No, as he sat there eating all the food Thatch had to offer with the Yonko drinking himself into a stupor, adhering to the rules he had up until that point was far out of mind. For the most part, the crew had kept their distance. Once everyone woke up they returned to their duties, decidedly not bothering the three captains seated on the deck. Marco was there but kept quiet and far away from Shanks, if he could help it, and Thatch was in and out preparing more food. The Pirate King would have felt bad about that, except the cook was the one insisting on doing the work and making more. His injury was mostly healed, or so Luffy was told, so he was trying to get back into his old routine. For the most part, Shanks took the time travel thing pretty well. With as many users as I've seen, nothing surprises me, he'd said. Luffy was just glad he believed him. He didn't want a repeat of the whole Ace incident. The old man's stare brought an abrupt end to their idle chat and both men returned to focus. Most of the crew had gone off to bed early to give the captain some privacy, as the study wasn't quite large enough to seat the three of them comfortably. All the tension from their earlier conversation returned with full force, Luffy furrowing his brow as his thoughts drifted to his brother, sailing alone across the waters. He hoped he was doing fine. Was he lonely? He hadn't fallen into another river, had he? He hadn't found Teach, had he? Newgate leaned back in his chair, the machinery attached to him beeping and blinking as it did whatever it was supposed to do. The sight had Luffy's eyes softening, his mouth pulled tight. Sometimes he would forget that the old man was in poor health. With how he fought at Marineford it was hard to believe, but looking back maybe even then he hadn't been at his best. If he had been, would the outcome have differed? Luffy closed his eyes, deciding to speak up first. Ace won't die. I won't let him. He could feel their eyes on him as he dropped a stripped clean bone onto one of the plates spread between them, but said no more. Hey, Anchor, that name was nostalgic. He hadn't heard it in about 2 decades. Shanks wouldn't have dared to call him that after he became king of the pirates. He'd moved past it. It's been bugging me since you said it earlier. Your brother, he didn't make it, did he? His fingers dug at the fabric of his shorts, ready to tear under the crushing force of his grip. No. It's my fault, but this time he will. I'll make sure of it. The weighted air around them seemed to intensify with that, and he was sure he knew why, but he didn't address it. And neither did they. 2 days later found the Pirate King waking from his slumber in the room of the 2nd Division commander. He yawned and stretched, automatically heading to the deck of the ship. Today he would set out to reunite with his brother. He wasn't as excited as he imagined he'd be, mainly because of the talk a few days ago. With 2 Yonko and the Pirate King wanting Ace to live, one would think his mind would be at ease, but it wasn't. Luffy winced as the sun's harsh glare assaulted his vision, instinctively blocking the light with his hand. Dragging his feet across the ground, he wanted nothing more than to go back to sleep, or eat. Eating sounded good. Oh look, Marco. Can I eat you? He asked drowsily, uncaring of the glare and smack upside the head that he received for those words. It took a while for him to realize he'd even said them, and when he did he simply laughed. The blonde rolled his eyes, folding his arms across his chest as he leaned his weight against the outer wall of the mess hall. Thatch is fixing something up for you, Yoi. He'll bring it to you when he's readied your provisions. She, thanks, pineapple guy. Luffy didn't receive more than an eye roll for the nickname before the first mate disappeared inside, leaving him with the few men manning the deck. As his mind tried to fight through the haze of sleep, his legs systematically led him to the bow of the ship and he plopped down on the figurehead, looking at the sea stretching into the horizon. He smiled. It wasn't sunny, but it was nice. He liked that spot. His stomach growled. He should have eaten Marco while he had the chance. Shaking his head of stupid thoughts such as those, the pirate had a flash of recollection and shoved his hand into his shorts, digging around until he retrieved a baby transponder snail. He always get yelled at for storing things there, but he had no pockets. What was he supposed to do? He looked at the snail and grinned. Should probably tell Ace he was going to be heading his way, shouldn't he? His brother might get mad if he didn't. He'd said he would, after all. So Luffy dialed and waited, that distinct, repetitive sound filing his ears. Pura 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 puru. Pura 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 puru. Pura 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 puru. Pura 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 puru. As it went on, Luffy's expression started to fall, his smile replaced by honest confusion. It just kept ringing and ringing and ringing until finally he hung up. And tried again. And again and again. No answer. The Pirate King pouted but reasoned with himself that his brother probably just had another sleep attack. They happened at such horrible times, geez. He needed to tell Ace that he was going to go meet him, but he supposed he could just try again later. It would take a few days for them to meet up. But how would he find him if Ace didn't tell him where to go? He didn't have his Vivre card. An image off paper crumbling into nothingness had his anxiety peaking, and he almost crushed the snail with his grip. The pirate's focus was stolen when his eyes caught on the faint silhouette of a bird against the backdrop of the blue sky. He blinked at it in silence, watching as it neared the ship. A seagull. A news coup, huh? Luffy reached out as it dropped a rolled-up newspaper and fled, his arms stretching and retracting. He watched with a blank expression as it disappeared into the distance once more before looking down and unraveling the paper. His eyes locked onto his brother's face and he felt himself pale. It was the photo from Ace's bounty poster one he had tacked to the wall on Sunny, so he recognized it well and soon he found himself reading below, an article about the 2nd Division commander's capture and detainment, a short snippet on Blackbeard becoming the newest warlord, and a statement about his impending execution. He felt like he was going to be sick. No, this was too soon. His younger self he wouldn't have even met Brook yet, he wouldn't make it to impel down. Luffy wasn't sure how long he sat there, his body still as he stared at his brother's poster with wide, disbelieving eyes, the paper tearing under his grip. No, he wouldn't accept this. He wouldn't let it happen again. Not this time. Not again, not when he came back. Oi, Straw Hat, a voice called from behind Marco's. He registered and he hadn't even noticed him approach. You about ready to leave? Another voice asked Thatch. I've got everything ready for you. Probably want to eat before you go, though, The cook chuckled, soon silenced and worried when the Pirate King turned back to him. Luffy's face masked his anxiety well, but he didn't smile. His mouth was pulled taut, and he stared at them with complete seriousness. Marco narrowed his E. He was handed the paper. Everything was quiet as he read it over, his expression slowly falling to grim concern as he reached the end, and he looked up at Luffy. This is what happened in your time. A nod. Thatch snatched the newspaper next, eyes wide and jaw slack as he read the headline, Shit. Luffy turned back to the ocean, its view now tainted by the feelings rolling in the pit of his stomach. It's sooner than last time, he stated, his fists clenched tightly around the fabric of his shorts. Other me won't make it on time. The redhead cursed again and again and again until it turned into a long slew of angrily spat syllables, running a stressed hand through his hair as he paced back and forth onto the deck. We gotta tell Oyaji. I'll go do that. Fuck. This wasn't supposed to. His voice dropped again into a mutter and he spun on his heel, making a beeline for the old man's room. The first mate watched his brother go before turning back to Luffy. What's your plan, Yoi? I'm not waiting. Don't care what the giant old guy says. He'll tell you it's not your fight. It is, Ace promised me. He said he wouldn't die. The pirate bit his lip, reaching his hand to his head and his anxiety peaking when the tips of his fingers were met with nothing but strands of hair. He missed his hat. He's my brother. Marco sighed. We better make sure he keeps that promise, then. Luffy slumped over the railing with a groan. Stupid mustache guy. It had taken all day for the captains to finally agree on the first steps to take in rescuing Ace, as both were stubborn, and now that it was over his stomach caught up with him, and he realized only then, in the dead of night, that he hadn't eaten. Where was Marco when he needed him? Pouting, he stared at the water below. The Yonko wanted to go with the same strategy he used last time traveling underwater with coated ships and showing up at Marineford. Luffy wasn't smart, and he didn't plan things his crew made up for that flaw, but he at least knew he didn't want to go with a repeat of the same scenario. If it didn't work once, then it wouldn't work the second time around, right? The best they could do was try to avoid such a large-scale fight as the one at Marineford and, more importantly, keep away from Akainu. He just hoped that he didn't make it to Impel Down late this time, that he could take his younger self's place. Luffy was stronger now. He could take on that stupid poison guy, no problem. So, why was he still worried? Why did all of this feel so wrong? Hey, a lazy voice called, and soon there was another leaning heavily on the rail. The Pirate King glanced at Marco, his frown never letting up, and returned to staring out at the water. Can I eat you now? No, but I'm hungry. You're always hungry, Yoi. No fair, this time he had a reason, too. He hadn't eaten since the night before. How long had it been since he last skipped a meal? Too long, anyway, he needed meat. Both pirates were quiet. What's on your mind? The blonde finally asked. His eyes on the stars hung overhead, not the murky depths like his company. For a moment Luffy didn't answer. It was rare for him to hesitate, but over the years the trait only seemed to grow. Maybe he was getting old. After a stretch, he looked up to that same sky. When my bounty became higher than Ace's, I was really happy. 'Cause I felt stronger, you know? He felt eyes on him but wasn't interrupted. But then, it wasn't fair, right? Because Ace was stuck. He couldn't get it any higher, 'cause he couldn't do anything. So I wasn't excited anymore. I wanted to surpass him, but I didn't really get to. He shifted his weight, his face blank as he thought back to that day. Determination returned and his brows knitted together in a hard look. I want to beat him. Properly this time, because it's no fun beating someone who's dead. Heavy lids closed over blue eyes. You'll get your chance. Luffy grinned and nodded, some of his earlier doubts lifting with those words. Yep, she. But you know, I still kept my promise. Even though he couldn't keep his. We'll live with more freedom than anyone else.